back beyond that 24 feet. And then determining whether you would like to require the applicant to construct the third southbound traffic lane on Orient as part of this approval. So it would be kind of using the future building to meet some code sections. So whether you would want that third lane in. Included, this is ODOT's comment at the bottom in red. So ODOT is recommending that the second mitigation alternative, which includes adding 2 southbound approach lanes on Southeast Orient Drive at 26, be required at this time. We had originally recommended just having to put the 1 additional lane in rather than 2 because the future building wasn't being constructed. But if we're going to rely on the future building to meet sections of the code, you might want to consider constructing the second lane at this time as well. And then, this is the last slide, just the general recommendation of, again, this is a de novo hearing, we are hearing it again. So if there's any other conditions that you think should be modified, we can talk about those as well. I only really went through the ones that were appealed or that changed, but everything, in here would be, that's in bold. And I did not update the conditions list because I'm not sure what the decision will be. So anything is up for talking about, but I just kind of highlighted the main appeal items.
You guys are live.
Oh, we are now.
I got it figured out. I got many texts and emails. So now I know how to fix that in the future. So we're live. You are on YouTube now.
Okay.
Thank you, Emily. Any clarification questions?
Not at this time.
Yeah.
Not
yet. It's a lot.
Cheryl,
Yeah, it's
you
a
have a
big one.
good list there.
I was gonna say, I reserved the right.
This is one of our simpler ones, right? Okay. Thank you again, Emily. It's a lot of work, a lot of things to keep track of. And we'll call for the applicant's presentation.
Good evening, Tracy Brown, 17075 Fur Drive in Sandy. I'm having Chris pass out from Space Age. He's passing out some plans. I went low tech, not knowing if the high tech would work or not. So, I spent a little paper to put together the plans, but I thought it'd be good just to have them in front of you. They're on the, they're in your packet, but finding them in 100 and so odd packet
Appreciate
is kind of
that.
challenging. So, yeah, we were pleased to get the director's decision. And there was basically 12 different conditions that the applicant had some concerns about. So we did go through, a pre-application conference with the city, and there was also some items that were identified in the incompleteness letter that we addressed. So I just wanted, maybe I'll do this quickly. Emily kind of went through the site plan. So you can see where the building is, the canopy. There's a drive-in off of Crescent Street and a drive-out as well onto Orient there. And the trees kind of in question are right there along Highway 26. I'll talk more about the future building and how that came to be and what our kind of intent with that is. So between the time we got the incompleteness letter and if you want to just go to the perspective view, that would be the second page. Between the time we got the completeness letter and finalizing the design, one of the items that had been raised was a concern about there wasn't an entrance on the south side of the building. So the south side on the convenience store is to the right in this case. And so the architect busily worked and created a south entrance there as required. He also moved the entrance, the primary entrance was on the west elevation, formerly was a little bit further north to the left, but he moved it to be more of a kind of in line with where the south entrance is. So we made a pretty substantial change there. Also on the east elevation, if you look at that, it'd be not the next page, but the page after that. There was a concern about, that's the bottom elevation, or no, actually the top elevation. There's a concern about, there's the requirement for these different wall planes, and so he did some innies and outies on that elevation as well. So it meets the code. So the future building was kind of identified we go back to the site plan. So the challenge with this site is we have a lot of frontage on Highway 26. I mean, as you can see, and we're not developing it all right at this time. It's just not feasible to do that. And so as I was kind of brainstorming options, I sent some possible options to the planning director to get input on, you know, what do you think if we do a kind of a future building to satisfy that frontage requirement? We're fine kind of locking it in terms of the size of it, the location, and that kind of thing. But it wasn't an attempt to get around anything. You know, the other, I asked them, the other option is do a special variance. And, you know, we could have applied for a special variance if we had known that that would have been the direction, but there was all indication that that seemed like a good approach. And I think it is a good approach. It kind of identifies a footprint for a future building. And it, you know, based on that adjustment to the standard, it meets the code as it is. So it seemed like a reasonable way to move forward without going through a special variance, because the applicant's real intent was to do a design that met the code. That was, and we spent a lot of time on the roof. I mean, I don't tell you how many roof patterns I looked at working with the architect who's in Utah designing this roof so it meets the code, and it does. So we spent a lot of time, and then with these changes, we really thought we had it dialed in. So when we got the conditions, we're a little bit surprised with some of them. So as you can imagine, trees, seems like that's the big issue. I don't know why exactly, but that is the big issue. So there's the tree protection. So on my outline, I go through the standard, which is in the urban forestry section. And so the standard is that based on the site of the size, or the site size, we're required to retain 7 trees. And we're proposing 12 trees, actually 13, because one of them's in fair condition. So we're meeting the standard in that case. We also, because there was some concern about the root protection zone, we hired an arborist to look at that. And I think, as Emily mentioned, that kind of issue has been sorted out in terms of what is the critical root zone. And, you know, what the city is wanting, as I understand it, is an identification and a fencing of 1 foot 4 inch of diameter critical root zone, but they're allowing some encroachment in that to construct that sidewalk along the highway. So then there was the condition of additional tree retention. There's a bunch of different conditions in there and discussion about these 6 additional trees. So the applicant's primary concern, looks like there's some, applicant's primary concern is really that the trees will block the view. And also, I guess, the concern that as far as we can tell, based on the urban forestry and all of the other standards, he meets the code. So there's really no need to retain additional trees. So that's our kind of basic premise. So as I go on to the landscape buffer section, so the code requires, properties in the C2 are required to either plant or retain a certain number of trees, and it's 30% of the frontage, you know, more intact. So as Emily mentioned, our plan is showing that we're proposing to retain 33% of the trees. And then if you wanted to go to the last page, which is the landscaping plan, this shows not only are we protecting those trees, we're actually kind of restoring the entire frontage with a series of evergreens and all native shrubs. And that's kind of above and beyond what really the code requires. So the code wants you to protect trees to the extent practicable up to 30% of the frontage. And then for the additional area, there's a list of plants, combination of trees, shrubs, and ground cover that are planted in that area. So it's a pretty extensive landscaping plan for the highway frontage that we're proposing. So again, it meets the code, it's 33%. We did request with the building, the future building, an adjustment to move the building back a little bit because we wanted to protect those trees a little bit more. So we requested 20% adjustment, so it gets you back to 24 feet rather than 20 as required. And Emily was indicating that the city would prefer the trees a little bit further, or the building, future building, a little bit further back. We don't really have a problem with that. You know, it'd basically be probably a couple more feet, so it's outside that critical root zone. It shouldn't be a big deal for the future building. One of the items that was mentioned is regarding the 6 trees, is that, you know, one of the reasons that was brought up is the Green Corridor Agreement. And later that was kind of retracted after I submitted some additional information. So what this is an agreement between ODOT, I think Clackamas County, and Metro used to be involved in it, that says in the area between the Gresham urban growth boundary and the city of Sandy urban reserve, there's a kind of a desire to keep some of the natural forest along there. So this area is not in that area, so it should never have been cited as a reason to protect those trees. Anything in the city of Sandy urban reserve boundary is kind of planned for development of some kind, you know, so that corridor agreement doesn't apply. The other reason that was mentioned had to do with, you know, the future building, and I guess they're kind of somehow tying these other 6 trees to the fact that this is a future building, and those are really 2 separate standards. There's a tree standard, which requires a landscape area along the highway of 30%, we're making that, and then there's the building frontage standard, and we're requesting an adjustment, and we're proposing the future building to make that. So it's really kind of blurring the lines to call the requirement to protect these trees because of the future building. They're 2 separate and independent standards. So a little bit more on the building frontage requirement. So as I mentioned, we proposed to the director of this future building, I kind of laid out some options, and he preferred the first option, which was to show it as a future building to avoid a special variance. We requested 2 adjustments, one to the length of the building to reduce it from 50% frontage to 40%, and another one to the setback. And it seemed to make sense to do that. In the report, they talked about it as a fictitious building, and I looked that word up, and that's kind of a very negative word to be using regarding this building. You know, it's similar to fake, false, fabricated, and a sham. This isn't that. This is a future building that we intend to build if there's sewer out there. And it was a way to kind of satisfy the code requirement. It's not fictitious and it's not a sham, as staff is kind of insinuating here. So with that, we do meet the code with the approval of the 2 adjustments. And, you know, the criteria for the adjustments are pretty basic, as you probably know. It's not a variance standard. Anyway, now I'll go on to the LED band a little bit, let's talk about that. So there's actually 3 conditions related to the building: the LED band, the additional clear windows, and the awnings, which is the new one that came up. So I'll talk about the LED band. So this is, I'll pass out a picture on this. So this is kind of the concept. So I think Commissioner Carlton asked about, or somebody asked about where that band would be. So this is the concept in your packet. I didn't bring a copy of it, but in your packet there was a diagram that the architect showed how that band or that lighting put on the building. And essentially, if you kind of think of the soffit of this building, and there's some cavities underneath that soffit, and the lighting is recessed up in there. So it's intended to kind of create, some kind of aesthetic to outline the roof. He said it would also, provide a slight wash of color over the building at night.
It goes all the way around the building,
All the way around?
including the east elevation.
I think so, yeah.
How about the overhang on the pumps or the?
Yeah, on the pumps, what we showed on the pumps was more of an applied onto this. If you look at that, you can go back to, you're talking on the canopy?
Yeah, on the canopy over the pumps, is there the similar LED lighting?
Yeah, there's proposed, if you look at this diagram I sent on the kind of perspective, you can kind of see it there. It's right above the blue. And as we mentioned, that if it's necessary, so this band, the applicant would prefer this, kind of his standard way of doing it, but as we said in our narrative, and I think Emily mentioned, we could adjust that to be more similar to what's proposed on the convenience store. So it's kind of more recessed and not directly applied. I mean, I don't know I'm not an architect to technically know how it's done, but that's the way he explained it to me. So that's, during the daytime, the band, particularly on the canopy, will just show up as kind of a red band. And then at night it would be illuminated. So the question is this, I guess I pointed out in my little narrative that the canopies of leather, shell, and Arco, although it's not red color, have similar bands around their canopies. Downtown Sandy, and canopies of shell and Arco were done in the last few years, and it didn't really seem to be a big deal. There's also, I did point out, there's a number of buildings around with permanent, we'll call it permanent holiday lighting, which is fine and attractive. So this isn't really that much different than that. It's just lighting. So what is the intent of it? It's basically to kind of make his building unique. It's really not strongly thematic. It's certainly not an attention-attracting device, because if you look at that section of the sign code, it talks about spinners, flags, whirligigs, things like that. It doesn't move. It's not intended to, spin. It's not a wacky man. These are just lights on a building. So we don't think it really qualifies as either a strongly thematic architectural style, and actually we believe it will add visual interest and complement the building's design, particularly at night. And during the day, it won't even really be known. You won't really notice it. So then regarding the clear window section, so in this one I wanted to refer to, I guess, the building elevations. Let's see here. So, I guess the one question that was raised in Emily's presentation is, is the window requirement required on, what is the activated frontage, I guess was the question.
That's a good question.
This is the first time I've had anyone ask that question, and I believe the way the code reads is that it's kind of identified by either if the city had identified it at the pre-app, we could have gone that direction, or lacking that, we'd identified it in our presentation. So to change that now is a major change. And I really think it is the elevation that we're proposing, that west elevation, which is the elevation facing the pumps, really makes the most sense for the activated frontage. And that elevation that's facing the highway, which we probably can guess not many people will walk, and cars won't be able to see in from 80 feet away, doesn't make that much sense to require huge expanse of windows. But that's just my opinion. And I believe we had looked at the code carefully. I don't have it in front of me, but I believe a reasonable read of that would say that the west elevation can be the activated frontage. One thing that came up during the presentation that isn't clear in the conditions had to do with the additional windows on the east or north. And when Emily talked about it, she said the window set, and she circled certain groups of windows. The condition reads a window, I believe. And I always, when I read it, I saw it as one of those windows possibly along that elevation to be put into clear glass, not a bank of 3 to 5 windows. So we object to, I guess, the concern is that, and I'll go to the floor plan, which is the second to last page. Hopefully your copy is dark enough, but my copy is fairly light actually, but really to put a window in the kitchen or storage area. So the purpose of these windows, as it's kind of stated in the code, is provide views to interior display areas or for security, safety, surveillance, those kind of things. You know, the primary movements of people is going to be probably between the fueling station and the convenience store. That's where the movements will be. So that's where all the big, bright windows, clear windows should be. The other elevations will have less activity. I do want to point out on page 4 of 6, at the top there, if you look at that code section that she's referring to, it does give an out. It says where the internal functions of a building preclude windows at this height, the reviewing body may allow windows above or below this height. So what we're proposing is, you know, an architect spent a lot of time after the store entrance is moved or required it on the south side. He really had a tough time figuring out how to fit everything in there and not put them in front of windows. And so he actually told me as that you kind of go to where the coolers are on the far right, there's a bank of 3 coolers there. He had another cooler, or maybe 2, along that wall, and those went away because of that additional door. You know, we're okay with that, but now to require those 3 windows in front of those coolers, to be clear, we're either saying we're gonna look at back of coolers, or you gotta redo the entire floor plan, which really is a tough call at this point. You know, it's a tough situation. And I think with, you know, for the security concerns, you know, this section, I mean, I think it means well, but it may not be kind of up to date in the modern era of technology with surveillance. You know, the applicant's indicated he's proposing about 16 security cameras around the facility. And, you know, those will certainly be a much better way of monitoring, say, the northeast corner of the site than a cash register looking through a storage closet, you know, out there. So I think just the practical common sense of that will go a long way. And I think I guess my sense, and, you know, in working with this code for 15 years, or not 15, 7 years, I think you have the flexibility to make those calls. You don't have to go through a rigorous special variance process to do that. It's built into the code. There's some amount of discretion. So I'll go into the new recommendation that was identified. This is regarding pedestrian shelters. over primary entrances and all pedestrian areas. And, you know, this was the first I've ever heard that the staff is thinking of this as the entire pedestrian area. So if you look at our plan, even the building floor plan, you can see the awnings, they're little dashed lines out there. So the south elevation has 3 awnings. The west elevation has 1, plus the large canopy, I think at least 2, and the east or the north elevation has an awning as well. These are the primary pedestrian areas, getting people, you know, to the building, to that south entrance, from the parking on the north of the building, and then to the primary entrance. And based on, there's maybe some discussion about what look you're going after, but.
You're almost done. Click the Add to Chrome button.
Sorry.
Then click Add Extension to continue.
Technology, totally reliable.
But yeah, I don't really think the,
What are you doing over there, Lasowski?
Trying to look at the Arco
It's like
station.
that's the third thing that's happened tonight, yeah.
Sorry, you can't do it.
yeah, I'm not sure the code is really saying that the entire pedestrian area needs to be covered. It's wanting some coverage over the pedestrian area, but it's not saying the entire area. And that, if that's a change in the code, that will substantially change every building in town, because there's very few buildings that ever were, even all the facade, I did 40 projects, never thought of it as an entire pedestrian area. It's more these refuges. You go from one to the next to get to your destination across the building. There may be some places that it's appropriate in real high traffic areas to have more of a continuous awning or smaller gaps, but this wouldn't seem to be one of them, really. So with that, I think I'm gonna take a break, and I'm gonna go through all the details of the specific conditions, but at this point I wanted to bring up Todd, who is the project arborist, to just talk a little bit about the trees. And then I'll ask Ray to come up, talk about those 6 additional trees. And I think Chris wanted to talk about the lighting, the Kelvin rated lighting issue, and then I think Jim wanted to talk about business owner stuff. So, go ahead.
Good evening. I'm Todd Prager. I'm the project arborist. I'm with Terragon and Associates. The address is 3145 Westview Circle, Lake Oswego, 97034. Regarding the tree protection for trees 76 through 89, which are the ones that are currently proposed for retention, I think Emily went through it pretty well. We're in agreement with the third-party arborist that reviewed our report. There were just some differences on the wording. But the critical root zone of 1 foot per inch radius, DBH, we're comfortable with protecting that amount, and that's our intent. Any work within that zone will be overseen by either our firm or the option to have the third-party arborist review that work and then provide a post-construction report to the city. We're supportive of that, and that's our intent. So beyond that, I don't have much more to add, but if you have questions later on, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. For the record, Ray Moore, All County Surveyors and Planners, P.O. Box 955, Sandy, Oregon. And Todd's handing out just a quick exhibit I did using Google Earth. We all love Google Earth anymore. But it's sort of just a rough exhibit to show what it would sort of look like traveling eastbound coming into the site. And if you take a look at the photo above on the kind kind of the middle of it, but there's a power pole back in the trees, and you can see in red, I wrote property line. So that's the subject site's most westerly property corner. And then you'll see it stretches to the right, 172 feet. So all of those trees are the trees that are gonna be proposed to be saved within this 33% of the site's frontage buffer. And then at the end of that, there's a sign there. If you drive by, you'll see a sign, a highway sign, and there's sort of a gap between the trees we're saving and the 6 additional trees the city's asking us to save. And the picture's a little deceitful, I guess, that because the camera's so high up on the car, and what does this berm really look like? But if you ever drive by and really look over there, you'll see that pretty much the frontage that we're preserving, the 172 feet, where the trees are and the edge of the pavement, it's basically the same elevation. And then as soon as you hit that gap, this berm starts to rise. So where the 6 trees are, it starts to rise 2 to 3 to 4 feet, up to 14 feet once you get up to where the largest cut is. And with the application materials that we submitted on page 6 of 6, you'll see a little color diagram, and we've been trying to do more of these.
They're really helpful.
Yeah, and so what that color diagram is showing is the reds cut and the greens fill. And so the darker the red, the more cut, and you'll see a table off to the right. So the darkest red's 14 feet down to 0 or 1. So you can kind of see where those, the 6 trees that are being saved, we're cutting, it starts off at 2 to 3, I think about 3 feet of cut right at that location. And for a couple reasons. One is the building is on the backside of this berm, and the existing grade on the backside of the berm is about elevation 708. We tried to set the building up at 708, but we couldn't get access to it from the roads. It was too steep. So we had to sink the building down to elevation 701 for the finished floor. So between the finished floor of the building and the highest bank is about 14 feet. So we have to take that berm down. So there's kind of a couple things going on here. It's grading and tree preservation and this buffer, but it sort of starts with, we got to remove the berm, or he's not going to sell any gas. Nobody's going to see the building. Excuse me. So that's what I'm trying to show there. Emily suggested maybe trying to leave those, and there's a couple issues with trying to leave those 6 trees and leave that small berm at that location. We've heard tonight that we got to stay, 1 foot per inch diameter away from these trees. So a 20-inch tree, we got to stay 20 feet away from it all the way around. Well, we're grading on site to this parking lot, right adjacent to where these 6 trees are. And there's a condition, it's actually in the original approval, it's condition like A1 or 1A, whatever, but it's right at the beginning. And the condition talks about connecting the parking spaces on that side of the parking lot with the sidewalk south to the sidewalk along the highway, rather than building a parallel sidewalk 20 feet apart. And we didn't show the sidewalk on the plan. That became a condition of approval. And I said, great, we can do that. But if you look at the site plan, it goes right through those 6 trees. So I don't know how we would satisfy that condition and save the trees. While we're on that note, as an engineer, a planner, whenever we dive into a new project like this, we look at the code, and staff has looked at the code, and they're interpreting it a little different than I am. I mean, for instance, the first recommendation is to deny it. And I'll just read it. The applicant's proposal does not adequately implement the Sandy style due to excessive tree removal and not protecting and enhancing Sandy's tree canopy. That came right out of the intent code of the design standards, 1790. And so to deny it based on just some fluffy intent language, that's not how it works. The intent of the code, if you've ever written or read a code, there's the intent section. But then as you dig deeper in the code, there's standards that you have to meet. And in this code, for example, she's right. The intent is to protect and enhance Sandy's tree canopy, particularly along Highway 26. So okay, that's intent, now let's dig into it. You get to 1790-120 F2, and it specifically says, parcels abutting Highway 26 shall provide a landscape buffer comprising not less than 30% of the highway frontage. So, as an engineer, as a designer, okay, let's meet the code. Let's block out 30%. It worked out to do 33 because the site worked out well where we didn't need to do any grading anyway. And so, in my opinion, that section of the code, we meet it. So how can you recommend denying it because of the intent of the code? I mean, if the intent of the code, here's a good example. Well, the next condition option is 3, and one of the option was to increase the buffer to 260 feet. That's 50% of the frontage. So if the code wanted to be 50% of the frontage, it would have said 50% of the frontage. So again, I don't see how you can deny it if we meet the code. So you have the buffer criteria. So that's what that's speaking to. The other criteria that we have to meet, we all know 17102, 1792, we're all working to try to mesh the two together, but right now we have these two codes. So one is very specific. How many trees do you need to save on a site if you develop in Sandy? Again, there's an intent. Its intent is to conserve and replenish trees, and then, well, how do you do that? Okay, let's turn to 17-102-50. And it's very detailed. I mean, it's great. As an engineer, I can count trees. And the code says at least 3 11-inch trees or greater to be retained for every acre. I can do math. 2.35 acres, we need to save 7 trees. Just so happen we have to do the 30% buffer. There's actually 13 trees in there, 12 that qualify. So we're saving almost double the amount of trees that the code says we have to. There's 3 other criteria. Retained trees can be located anywhere on the site at the landowner's discretion, not the city's. That's what it says. 3, trees proposed for retention shall be healthy and likely to grow. 4, if possible, at least 2 of the required trees per acre must be conifer species, which they are. We meet that. 5, this is an important one. Trees within the required protected setback areas may be counted towards the tree retention standards. So, these trees happen to be within the setback area, but the code says you can count them. So we're already almost double the number of trees we're required to save. Staff has said, hey, deny it, they don't save enough trees. We think they should save 6 more. And if you do the math on that, the code says 3 trees per acre. We're proposing to save 7 trees per acre. Excuse me. We're proposing to save 5 trees per acre. And by adding the additional 6 trees, staff's recommending to save 8 trees per acre. That's almost 3 times the number of trees per acre that their code says that we have to save. And so I get really frustrated, I gotta tell you. I thought we did an outstanding job in the building. Tracy's right. Tracy ran those architects through the ringer for about 2 months to get this building so that we met Sandy style, because we understand we don't like variances in Sandy. We just meet the code. It's approved. And so, in my opinion, I met the trees. Tracy and the architect met the standards on the buildings. And so when I see a recommendation to deny it because I didn't meet Sandy style, I gotta say it's frustrating, and I'm not even, I can't even believe it, to tell you the truth. And it seems like she held a lot of weight in the intent, but you gotta read past the intent. So basically it boils down to the buffer. We exceed the buffer requirements. Sandy, staff's wanting us to do 50%. We're hitting it at 30. We're saving enough trees to meet the code. I think I've explained why we have to take out those trees. If we get stuck with that condition, it's conflicting with another one that says I gotta build a sidewalk through it, through the trees that we're saving. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
You're just presenting now.
What's that?
Just presentation.
Yeah.
It's We'll just probably have. presentation,
Yeah,
but,
sure.
You know, let the process go.
No problem. Thank you.
Just have a lot of handouts.
My name is Chris Heward. I work for Space Age Fuel, 16378 Southeast Andrick Parkway, Damascus, Oregon, 97089. I'm here to talk about the Kelvin restriction on the lighting that was recommended. We reached out to our lighting manufacturer rep, Rice Christ, and spoke with them and asked them to write this letter on our behalf. They currently represent LSI Industries, one of the largest light producers for gas station canopies, and they do not currently produce a standard gas station canopy light that is in the 3000 Kelvin color temperature. The standard lighting has been determined to be between 4000 and 5000 Kelvin per the IES recommended standards for gas station lighting. I also reached out to our local distributors and asked them for spec sheets on the 4 most commonly sold lights in our market in Oregon, which I included in these attachments, none of which come in anything less than 4000 Kelvin. I reached out to that company also to kind of look at what you guys currently have in Sandy. I wasn't familiar. ARCO specifies a 5000 Kelvin light temperature, which is what's being used at the ARCO gas station closest to us. Chevron specifies a 5700 Kelvin light. Again, drove around and looked at those things. I don't believe any of them felt harmful, or I didn't think they were wrong in their placement in the city. So that's what I was here to present today, just to show you what was being used, and I feel like that Kelvin restriction puts us not at parity with the other gas stations in the city. Thank you.
James Pliska, 7300 Southeast 190th, Gresham, Oregon. I want to be quick. I know it's a lot of information and everybody's probably tired after a long day. But I'm the property owner and proposed developer of this venture. Anyway, be just kind of frank. We came to Kelly initially and tried to make this work because we wanted to make this project work without going through variances. So I thought we had an agreement on how we were going to develop it, and through the whole process, we communicated, our architects communicated, Ray communicated on the engineering side, and we thought we had a pretty nice development that worked for Sandy style and for us. And it's going to be a beautiful building if we build it. But there's a couple things that, it's really hard to live with, or I don't know if I can live with, if we can't see the building. And by saving those additional 6 trees, it blocks our site. And, oh yeah, Emily said, oh yeah, that's no big deal. They'll see it once they drive by it. Well, okay, that's too late, okay? So, I feel that's a big anchor in this whole thing, and that was one of the last things, since we, pretty much met the requirements. I mean, if the minimum requirements are such, and we go beyond that even, and it's still not good enough, so I don't know what to do. I mean, I'm logical, and I'm willing to work with planning and whatnot to make it to work, but the code is not the same. I want it to be the same for everyone too, and it doesn't seem to be. In regards to the LED lighting, there's a ton of LED lighting already in Sandy, and I don't know, in regards to if we put it in a cove, that's fine. I mean, it's part of our brand. We have it at all our new locations, and it sets off our brand. So when people go by, they go, oh, okay, that's a Space Age. Maybe, some people will, some won't, but it's something that differentiates us from, Chevron, ARCO, and these other brands. So I feel it's a part of you know, our brand. You know, all the stuff on the building orientation, and the building orientation is, you know, it's towards the pumps. That's where people are gonna come into the location. They're not gonna be coming off the highway. If I get one person there a month that comes off the highway, I'd be surprised. You know, so some of the, you know, we're trying to, I mean, whether you deny us on and make them clear windows on the sides, I don't really care. I think it's gonna look better with non-operable windows, just because the fact they'll be looking in at a, you know, a kitchen, and it's probably not gonna be always tidy, or, you know, a back of a cooler or whatnot, so, that I feel, you know, whatever direction you wanna go. Other than that, you know, I think we'll try to work with, you know, planning on some of the smaller issues, but, you know, the tree deal is just kind of a killer, I think, so, thank you very much.
Wanted to quick wrap up, so maybe we can talk about this later too at the second round, but on page 5 and 6 of my little handout, I kind of went through each of the conditions that we were appealing. You know, there's a couple of new things that came up in the latest review, and I made some cross-outs of language that I thought would be, that we're requesting, basically. So this.
I'm sorry, what? I missed the last.
These are, so if you look at, for example, the summary of requested modifications, the first condition that we're appealing is condition A1, bullet points 5 and 6. So this first bullet talks about the root protection zone of the 12 trees, and we're requesting that those 6 trees be removed from this condition. So this is kind of a edited version based on our request. There's a couple of them, such as item number 2, that there may be some massaging, and we can talk about the language that goes in there versus removing it. So, no, do you want me to go through each one of these now, or wait? I saw one nod, yeah, I saw one nod.
Mine
no.
was no.
Oh.
Actually,
Okay.
I'm kind of getting sponged
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
understand. I think this will be helpful as you kind of get more to the nitty-gritty of this.
Mhm.
Okay.
Is that in your narrative, Tracy?
Yeah,
Like
it's
the
on
one you
page
handed out?
5 and 6 of that I just handed out tonight. All right, so with that, I guess, thank you very much. You know, as Jim said, I think we spent a lot of time working on this building, and I think we've done a pretty good job, in my opinion.
I have
Thank you.
one question,
All right.
Tracy, that hasn't even come up, and it's the best time to ask you. The area where the proposed building is going to be, let's assume that the station parking lot has all been built. What does that look like?
It's gonna be landscaped, let's see, I think it should.
I saw one thing, you just said colored.
No, it'll be kind of restored and landscaped. I think, let's see here.
I forget where I saw.
Yeah, I thought there was more landscaping detail. I'm kind of looking at staff. Do you recall, Emily, if there was additional detail for that area? I know it was talked about in the condition, and we're fine with doing some, you know, plantings in that area. So you're talking the area, kind of that triangle of where the
Yeah.
future building
Yeah,
will be.
it looks like it says native upland
Oh, yeah.
mix with color.
Yeah, it's gonna be grass. The drain field is under that area.
Okay, so
So
it's
it
like a
need-
little
it-
field.
Yeah, it'll be maintained, you know, mowed, field grass or something
Okay.
like that. Yeah. Were there other
Can I ask a
questions?
question? Yes.
Simple, yeah, quick one.
So I guess, and there's a lot of things, the buildings look like they're gonna be beautiful. But a really big question for me is, it seems like a lot is resting on the idea of this future building. So, and it seems like that's kind of out there in this indefinite period of like when that might happen. What would that future building be for? What,
It's hard to say.
yeah.
Yeah, I
so-
mean, really the
so-
only thing it's resting on is meeting the building frontage requirement.
Mhm.
So, Right now, we have a small building, we have a lot of frontage, and so that's the only thing it affects. There's nothing else it affects. And it was just a way to avoid going through, it was kind of, I thought, a reasonable approach, and that's why I ran it by Kelly before we proposed it, to avoid requesting a special variance. I mean, look at other projects, there's 6, 8, 10 special variances. We wanted to meet the code, we wanted to, do something that was reasonable. And so I proposed it could be this way, could be a special variance, what do you think? And he said that seemed reasonable. So that's why we made the request. And so the intent of it is to provide a placeholder. We're willing to, there were some conditions in there that talked about it needs to be a certain length, it needs to be set back a certain amount. There's supposed to be a door on the south side. We're fine with all that.
It's gonna be a commercial building, is it a commercial?
Yeah, it'll be a commercial building. At some point, as Emily mentioned, there's no sewer out there right now. The sewer is 1,500 feet away. At some point, assumably, the sewer will be out there, or there's some other technology, and it'll make sense. Can be developed. But right now, there's no timeline for that until the sewer gets out there. But it was primarily a way to put something there that complies with the code, and that then there would be conditions that would be established for its future development.
Yeah, I wanted to say one thing on that, in regards to that. Originally I proposed to have another building there. It's just the fact that there's nowhere else to put a drain field, and, the wells on the you have to be 100 feet from the well, and all other things. It's just been impossible to put that building in now until, sewer and water's out there.
So that's gonna be landscaped for now then?
Yeah, it's gonna be a drain field. So there'd be, grass that's mowed.
That's why the sewer's gotta come out, cause the building on top of the drain field.
I mean, from the road, you won't be able to see it because of the trees will be right in front of it, protected trees. From interior of the site, there is some perimeter landscaping, and then it will just kind of look like this grassy field over there. There are some street trees along the access drive going out to Crescent. But, yeah, I thought it was a creative, outside-the-box way of kind of addressing a code standard without having an actual building.
Yeah. Okay, I'll wait for discussion.
Can we take a 5-minute recess?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Sure.
we will do that. 5 turned into 10. Oh.
I'm gonna work up a transportation question.
I'm sure you'll think.
No, he had another meeting tonight, so I had to cover
Yeah.
for him. I think he was out in Canby or something. Okay. So I don't know exactly what, but he knew for a long time, so I'll help these guys with the staff report. Can you staff me like a month ago? I said, yeah, sure. But then I ended up having to go to a meeting last night, and then I've got this tonight, and I've got another one Thursday, so the weekend can't get here soon for me.
How long have you been with the firm?
Well, that's a complicated question, because Paul Elsner and Pam Beery hired me right out of law school, so I was there when David and Jack came on board, but then I went away. Yeah, so when David and Jack left Westland and came downtown, I was already there, but then I left for a long time. I took a job in Columbia County, and I was in the county counsel's office for a few years, and then I did private practice for a couple of years, and then
do your thing.
Yeah.
probably 3 or 4 years ago now, Paul came and got me, so they're looking to hire someone, and I'm looking to retire, so why don't we go talk to them again? So I came back, so this is my second.
Yeah, I've got questions, but I've been
So
careful not to touch anybody.
Somewhere between 3 and 4.
You deliver them all.
I probably will ask
Did about
if you,
3 or 4.
so far they don't appear.
But I never worked for Sandy before, because David and Jack always had his coverage. I mean, I do some, yeah, I do some stuff, like if they needed help, I'll go through some of that help, but I never got to come out to the meeting. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So Jack, I think Jack probably fully retired about 4 years ago, but he was kind of winding down for 4 or 5 years before that. But since I've been back this whole time, I mean, he's come in once or twice just to say hi to everyone, but he doesn't do any work. And then last year Paul retired too. No, Pam retired before Paul, so there's nobody with the last name. Yeah, I don't, some firms do that, some don't. I guess they don't really feel the need to put their name on it. I don't mind, because I've got history with.
Do they?
I was trying to, that's what I came up and did, I was trying to.
I think part of the issue is.
Yeah, it used to be Barry Ellsbury, and then it became Barry Ellsbury, and now everyone just calls it PEH.
It doesn't bother me when I drive out there, that's a darker area, and all of a sudden it's gonna have a bunch of light.
But the other one of those is, like, they backlight the buildings, and they definitely have a beam, but it's a downward, and it's less oppressive to me than
Then the LED.
than just straight edge.
Yes, exactly, I agree.
But that can't go up the building.
Okay, everybody back? Cameras rolling still?
Yeah, I didn't pause them this time.
Okay. Well, we'll reconvene here and pick up. We will now go to public testimony, and
2 ladies left.
Yeah, they said goodnight. They said
We
goodnight.
bored them out of here.
On their way out.
They say we lost our public.
Well, I wonder why.
But we will still give opportunity for proponent testimony if you're here and you're in favor of it and you're not the applicant. Now is the time. Or if you are opposed, you're an opponent.
I don't know if this gentleman wants to speak.
We're going to public testimony now, so we're going to, I'll go back to proponent testimony. If you're here and you are in favor of it, now's the time for testimony. Okay, or if you are opposed to it. Okay, now we'll give opportunity if you just are neutral and have a question or a comment. Okay, you have to move quickly with our commission. So that'll just pop us right to staff recap.
Right, you guys have a lot to think about tonight, for sure. I'll bring up a few points, and I'm sure Kelly has a few things as well. So it sounds like the LED lighting is part of the brand, which I think is what we would consider to be thematic architecture. So just keep that in mind when you look at that section of the code. As far as kind of, the highway side and, pedestrian activity, we're looking, this is somewhat of leapfrog development, so it's not kind of really in line, but 40 years into the future, in theory, the rest of the highway would have filled in and developed, and it may be more pedestrian activated and oriented, and that's what our code wants. So we're not just thinking about today, whether somebody might walk up to that building, we're thinking about, 40, 50, however many years into the future. So just another thing to keep in mind. As far as the windows, I think again, you have a lot to kind of think about on that, in terms of activated frontage, in terms of safety and security and surveillance cameras and all of that. I would point out, I know they don't want to redesign the interior, but that would be an option, or to even increase the building footprint, which would bring it slightly more into compliance with the code in terms of building frontage, And B, might allow more space, you know, for those coolers so that they're not right in front of the window or something like that. So that's always an option as well. And then, you know, clearly the trees is another big point once again. So to clarify on the denial, it's not based on the Sandy style components intent. Let's see if this pulls back up. Well, it might not pull back up, but it really would be more based on denying that request for an adjustment to 1790-120 D1, which again states that 50% of the site's frontage should be comprised of buildings. So you'd be denying that adjustment and denying the proposal based on that criteria, as well as, I believe it's 1790, actually I can look at my presentation, I guess, if you guys can't. So I can quote the right code section. So it would be 1790-00, the intent section, but section D, which states the city considers the following elements to be incompatible with the Sandy style. The reviewing body may deny or require modifications to a project with any of the following. Number 1, excessive tree removal and or grading that may harm existing vegetation within a designated landscape conservation area. So it'd be those two criteria that we're saying wouldn't be meeting. So it wouldn't be meeting the building frontage requirement, and then we'd be arguing that it would be excessive tree removal and or grading, so they're wanting to grade that berm. Ray showed the picture here. I had included in my presentation a picture taken a little bit closer of those trees that, you know, from that angle looked like it was flatter there, and looking at the contour lines from tree number 115, which is the easternmost additional tree we're requesting to retain. It looks like probably in the span of approximately 35 feet, it only raises less than 2 feet in contours. So I don't think that's the steep part of the berm. Doesn't seem to me like that would be affected too much in terms of, you know, either site visibility or just having to grade around that. And I think those were my main points. Kelly, do you have more to?
I do.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to take minutes. Okay. Yeah, so it's an interesting one. There's a lot of good points I think that were raised by both sides. I fully acknowledge the green corridor isn't applicable. We thought it was. We checked in with the attorney's office after we issued the original decision, and after Tracy brought it to our attention, and he concluded that it wasn't. So I think in in the staff report you received, there's actually the green corridor sign is actually struck. So we actually removed it. So I don't really know why it was brought up again tonight. We fully acknowledge it's not applicable with this application. I also want to mention that some of what they're showing on the landscape plan as the additional trees and native vegetation has to be planted there. So, I mean, I'm glad they're fulfilling the code requirement, but the code requires that 20 feet between, first 20 feet along the highway has to be filled with native vegetation and or existing native vegetation. So they're not really going above and beyond the code requirement. They're meeting the code requirement. I just wanted to make sure everybody understands that. So if you look at the adjustments section on page 42 of the staff report, I mean, that's whether you agree with retaining the trees or not, that's kind of a big question. I know trees comes up, I know it's frustrating, but I think it's because a comp plan has like 30 goals or 20 goals on tree retention. We have a tree code committee right now that I'd love to keep participating with, but we've just been too busy to do that. We have a landscape section that talks about tree preservation. The design section, 1790, talks about tree preservation. And then we have an urban forestry section for like subdivisions and stuff like that, and minimum tree retention. So if you look at our comp plan and all our development code, there's a lot of emphasis on trees. Now, whether there should be or not, that's debatable. But all we do as staff is implement and kind of look at the code and try to make decisions, factual decisions based on the best knowledge available. And that's what we're trying to do here. Now, whether the applicant brings up a good point, if, you know, Can the slope be graded down or not? I don't know. So that's what you guys are gonna have to decide tonight. But if you look at this adjustment section on page 42, you know, criteria A basically says the proposed development will not be contrary to the purposes of this chapter. So that's the 1766. Policies is a comprehensive plan. Like I'm saying, there's a lot of tree retention policies and other applicable policies and standards adopted by the code. And then if you'll see in our analysis, we felt that by granting the adjustment, you have to be providing some sort of amenity to achieve these standards, the ones I just read. And so by going above the minimum requirement of tree retention and native vegetation along the highway, we thought they would be doing that, and therefore the adjustment should be granted. So if you look through the different sections, that's what we kind of related to the adjustment, is that by fulfilling the comprehensive plan and other policies and standards adopted by the city, by retaining more than the minimum amount of native vegetation, that would be a reason to grant the adjustment and to grant basically this future building, even though it's not being proposed and we don't know when it will ever be proposed. Like maybe not in any of our lifetimes. I don't know. Maybe it will be. So we thought we were giving the applicant kind of a way out here by saying, yes, the adjustments will be approved, so as long as you provide additional vegetation, additional trees, and therefore it would meet the comp plan and the code. Now, whether you guys agree with that or not, that's kind of what's before you tonight, to kind of think about that and see if retaining those additional 6 trees is important or not. Maybe it's not to you, but that's something to consider when you're looking at that. The other couple things I wanted to hit on, yeah, Emily already hit on. I don't know, the LED lighting, it's not a huge thing to staff. Again, we're just interpreting the code. We thought it was thematic. It sounds like it is a space age thing, so it does sound thematic to us. Now, if they put it on the building and on the gas station canopy and kind of hit it under the cover, would it be a big deal? Probably not. But again, all we're doing is trying to interpret the code. We thought it was thematic. It sounds like it is. You guys get to make the decision whether it is or isn't.
Oh, I thought there was, the key thing though, I thought it looked okay with up recessed like on the building, like they show, and if they did the same thing on the canopy over, I mean, to me, that kind of is.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think it
There's some
satisfies.
consistency there that I think would make that look better also.
And I think it satisfies the dark sky concern.
Yeah.
So the only other thing I don't know, there's a lot of ways you could look at this. What we try to do as staff, and I know Mr. Moore, he kind of brought this up, that he was frustrated. And Tracy brought up that there's discretion in the code. That's a slippery slope. Because that's what we basically did, is we used our discretion to interpret different code sections like we interpreted them. And the applicant, they can make this argument, they're making it tonight, is that our discretion and our ability to interpret those sections was incorrect. So the more discretion you give me as the director and as Emily as an associate planner to make loosey-goosey code interpretations, I think the more issues you will actually run into. So what we try to do is read the code for what it is and try to make decisions based on the information before us.
Yeah.
Now, are we always going to be in agreement with the applicant? No. And maybe they're right on some things and we're right on some things. I don't really know. But I think that's a really slippery slope to say that the code has a lot of discretion and that staff should be applying a lot of discretion. Because I think you would hear from most applicants that that's not how they want us to apply the code. So I just wanted to, it was because I heard some testimony. It was also because I just wanted to kind of frame how we look at the code. We don't look at the code with a ton of discretion. We try to look at the code and say, this is what the code's trying to achieve. I think if some of these things that have been brought up, like Tracy brought up a good point on the covers all around the building, I think the code just needs some modification to be very clear and specific on how much it wants. It just needs to prescribe it. And then it's very clear for applicants to, when they make the building renderings, to meet that, and it's very clear for staff to interpret that. I think currently the code is a decent code, but I think it leaves a lot of interpretation as we've been running into with trees, with building design and all these things. So I think as these things are brought up, at future code modifications, we need to kind of try to figure those out. But I don't think allowing staff to have unlimited discretion or just to apply our discretion as we want is probably the best thing going forward. And I say that as a staff member, but if I was the applicant sitting on the other side, I would not want that as well. Because then there is a lot more ambiguity of are we meeting the code or not when they apply, so. I think that's all I had. I think you guys have some decisions before you tonight. As, I'll just remind you, and I'm sure Spencer, or Mr. Parsons could go into some more detail, but, it is a quasi-judicial decision. So whatever decision you make tonight doesn't actually bear anything with future decisions. You're not being asked to do any code interpretations tonight. You know, that wasn't applied for, so your decision tonight stands on its own.
That's correct.
Yeah.
It's, and that kind of carries also for some of the references to other potential land use applications that have come through the city before. Each application is gonna be evaluated based on the proposal that comes into the city and evaluated against the standards that are in place at the time that application shows up.
That's not the best segue, but I have a question about that. It's in the C2 zone, it's commercial development, it seems like commercial developments in similar zones generally have building pads along highway frontages that don't get built with the first phase. Is this really atypical to show a future building and rely on that for meeting code criteria?
Are they on just separate lots? That's what I was.
Sometimes, but I don't know that, well,
Yeah.
that's a good question.
Could be, I mean, they could have done that here. They could have gerrymandered the lot.
Are you asking like, so other like big commercial development pad sites where you have like future pad locations?
It doesn't strike me as particularly unique, I guess, is what I'm saying.
So it could be like a build to suit in the future kind of thing?
Right.
Yeah, I don't think it would be particularly unique. I think the only thing, you guys chime in, but I think the only difference or the only unique thing on this is that because they would need sewer extended like several thousand feet, that I think there's a little more question on really how available is it for a future pad site. I think a lot of times what you're talking about, sewer and other utilities are already available to that pad location.
Probably. It's fairly unique, I think, that there's non-city services for that here.
No, I think I think what Kelly said is exactly the point. I think that it's not uncommon, but it's also, it is uncommon for somebody to go to the effort to propose something like that and get an approval for it. Without facilities being readily available, and B, without an interest in extending the facilities. They would, maybe a developer would propose something like that and then want to enter into a development agreement or something like that with the city to install, to run the utilities out there and then, apply for SDC credits or something of that nature. In this case, and I think the applicant's been honest about it. They said, we'd be interested in doing it when sewer shows up, but they're not proposing to run the sewer out there.
Right.
So they're hung up waiting on that. So the feasibility of whether or not that's gonna happen is pretty much entirely dependent upon if and when sewer shows up. It's just a practical matter.
I mean, Mr. Brown is right that he asked me different ideas, and that was one that we talked about. They really wanted to avoid coming to planning commission. I know.
Are we that bad? That's
I think
scary?
it's just because you don't know if, like, if you ask for a special variance, you don't know if it's gonna be granted or not. So I think they were just not wanting to come because of the uncertainty of that. So that was one of the reasons why we threw out that future building pad idea. Yeah, maybe a special variance just coming before you guys and getting a decision would have been the better move. I don't know.
Well, it might be more defendable.
Okay. We need
Yeah, it might be
It
more
might have been more
defendable.
defendable.
we're on, staff recap. Anything else?
No, I mean, I think I'd forgotten to mention the adjustment code criteria that Kelly read, but just, in thinking about, again, this building frontage, 1790-120D, the intent is to maintain and enhance commercial streetscapes, emphasizing pedestrian scale and character, consistent with Sammy style. So that is really how we did tie those two together, with the additional tree retention, because the building wouldn't be there. We were arguing that the trees would add a little bit more pedestrian character, and as well as being more consistent with Sandy style. So that's sort of the nexus between those two pieces. And we're not arguing that they're not meeting the minimum retention standards for trees, and they are meeting the bare minimum, or over by 3% of the landscape corridor along Highway 26. But again, in asking for the adjustment to not provide that building along the street frontage and kind of activate the frontage with that. That's where we're kind of give and take, saying, okay, we were going to grant, or we did grant that adjustment, but on the premise that we save a few more trees, add a little bit more pedestrian character and feel to it that way. That's kind of makes sense.
I mean, when we get into the discussion later, I mean, there could be a happy medium result to this, I think. So.
A happy medium to the tree?
Yeah. I mean, staff was just looking to save some more trees in accordance with the code. If those 6 trees cannot be saved, maybe there's 6 others on the site that could be. So,
Okay.
just throw that out there.
All right. Opportunity for rebuttal.
Tracy Brown again. Yeah, I guess the building frontage adjustment, you know, I'm kind of upset that the staff isn't backing it up since they kind of led us down this path. And I kind of expected them to support this idea, and it's very disappointing. Regardless of that, to tie the additional tree retention to a building frontage requirement, I don't see the connection. I've never really heard of conditions of approval established based on a request for an adjustment. Adjustments have their own criteria. There's nothing in the code that talks about you can attach conditions necessarily to an adjustment. So I think they're kind of trying to weave in more tree protection by this code request. You know, and we made the request in good faith after we had reviewed it in emails. I didn't bring all the emails, but with the staff. And so it, you know, it's really very frustrating in that regard. You know, you guys have the ability, you know, when I mentioned discretion, I wasn't referring necessarily to staff. It's you all, and the way the code is set up, as I said, there's a 2-pronged approach. Clear and objective standards, you meet the code. 30%, yeah, you check. Or there's a discretionary approach, and the discretionary approach comes before the planning commission. And so that's where it allows the developer to propose things that are not meeting the letter of the code, that meet the intent of the standard. And actually, in some cases, it could result in better design, I think, because rather than getting hung up on is a pilaster 4 feet wide versus, you know, as required, you can make it 3 feet wide and have more windows on the building to compensate. So it provides a little more flexibility, potential for innovation. And so I wasn't suggesting it, that staff should be making the discretion. I feel they should be using common sense, certainly, but it's your role to have that discretionary power. Regarding the special variance, you know, this is what we applied for. We could have applied for a special variance if we had thought that we were gonna get pushed back from staff or some conditions that were kind of onerous to the owner. You know, the special variances are kind of the magic wand, we'll say. In my 15 years, I approved 2 special variances. They don't need to be used like handing out candy, and they shouldn't be, I don't think, because there's enough flexibility and tools within the code itself to get good design. I mean, look at all the great buildings that were built. I mean, I don't think the tractor store is one of them, and there was 8 special variances. So, I'm not kind of bringing that up to, you know, say bad things about anybody, but I'm just trying to talk about how I think within the code, there's sufficient flexibility and discretion to get good design that fits in Sandy very well, and not go through a whole barrage of special variances. Because the criteria in a special variance don't relate anything to the intent of that section. You know, so the analysis probably, when you're looking at a special variance to a window standard or something, it's not really looking at what is the intent of that standard, and does it make sense in this case? In our case, you know, the organization of the building, you know, and as I mentioned, for that particular standard, it does allow you know, it's written in the code, there's allow flexibility based on the internal function of that structure to allow certain windows to be clear, or to require certain windows to be clear, and allow certain windows to not be clear. But, so anyway, that's just some food for thought, that last part about special variances as you kind of think about this. But we really appreciate the opportunity. And, you know, it's been said, you know, we spent a lot of time, and the goal was to have you know, it wasn't necessarily it was just to try to design a building. Can it be done? You know, we were trying to be the first, make a building that can be done, that complies with the code. And we spent months and months trying to do that. And I think we got pretty close based on all of the input we got from staff leading up to submitting it. You know, we had some discussion about the location of the entrance on the south side, and we came to a resolution on that. And, you know, they've supported our discussion about that. But I think it can be done, and hopefully we can move forward with this project. Appreciate it. Do you have any questions for me?
I had one quick question. Do you know, I didn't see it on any of the plans, where the sign will be?
I don't know if they've
price of the
decided that
gas?
yet.
Okay.
That's kind of usually a separate sign package. The pole sign or a monument sign.
Yeah, whatever.
I'm sure there will be one, you know, they have to put up the gas prices.
Mhm.
But I don't know where it will be. I mean, I can imagine maybe somewhere around the corner.
Mhm.
I
Okay.
think yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Jason, do you want to talk about the street trees and all the evergreens? I don't think they come up.
Yeah, again, for the record, Ray Moore, All County Surveyors. There was some discussion prior to us appealing the application, and some emails went back and forth as I reviewed the conditions of approval, talking about mitigation trees and working with ODOT. And so I contacted ODOT and started some email chains and copied staff. And they were in regard to the trees that we're cutting in ODOT right away, and we have to mitigate. By the way, I've never had to mitigate for an ODOT right-of-way tree in my life, so this is something kind of new. But anyway, I wanted to find out, you know, what trees, do we have to plant new trees, or can we count the trees that we're planting because the city code requires us to plant street trees? And it was agreed that, and staff's pointed out in this application, that we can count the street trees. And I specifically asked ODOT, what kind of trees do you want? And they said, well, why don't you propose something and we'll review it. In the city of Sandy, the street trees, there's no evergreens on the street tree list. They're deciduous. So in the current conditions, there's some verbiage about mitigate with light trees. So in other words, we have to mitigate, or we'd have to plant street trees that are evergreens. That's not ODOT's intent. ODOT didn't require that. Staff, I don't know exactly why they're pulling that in as a condition, but it doesn't meet the code and it doesn't meet what ODOT wants. I'd recommend that the condition be written such that it's similar to what ODOT said. Have the applicant present a street tree plan, and we'll review it. And not be specific on saying we gotta replant with evergreens, so. Thank you. Any other questions for me?
Nope,
All right.
Tracy.
Jump back up, sorry, but I just want to go back to those pages 5 and 6. So as you go through this, these are, you know, based on the conditions that were that we appealed. These are our requested changes, though, there with some strikeout and a few points to discuss. So I don't, at this point, I can go through those. I don't want to. So we're, you know, I think I'll just quickly go through them so you have that. 6 trees, we're requesting that those be taken out, not required to be retained. And so thus the extension of this landscape buffer would not be extended. Ray just talked about on number 2 there, the species of trees. So we'd like to flesh that out. And the next bullet is the retention of those same trees, that would be struck. There is additional language in that bullet number 2.2, regarding the root protection zone. We're fine with that root protection zone of 1 foot per inch. We don't really want the 5 feet beyond the drip line, but I don't know if those are the same, or, because everyone's talked about the 1 foot per 1 inch of DBH. So we would like to request that. If it's an either or, that's fine. It sounds like maybe an or is either or, but the next number 3, we'd like to remove that bullet to allow the LED and to not require the additional windows on either the north or east or the south elevation. Those are problematic with the internal function of the structure and with the installation of safety cameras. It will do the job. We don't have a problem with the next bullet point. This is regarding the fencing around the protected trees. On number 5 there, we'd like to strike trees 110 to 115 in all 3 places. And then the last sentence of number 6, staff already said they struck that. I mean, this is another example of bringing in code that doesn't have any relevance in the City of Sandy code, you know, this $500. So I estimated that the applicant would have to have a letter of credit for around $20,000 sitting there in case a tree dies. Well, maybe less than that, but a substantial amount of money, and there's no basis in the Sandy City Code for that requirement, so I'm glad they struck that. The applicant, the next one we don't have a problem with. I guess Todd's still here. I don't know if we did have a little, when I talked to him earlier, this is regarding air spading, and it's probably a fine point that you all don't need to get involved in. He mentioned that for the area on the south side where we're putting the sidewalk, he doesn't recommend air spading that, which is not a good practice, but I'll kind of leave it at that. We're fine with the condition, basically. And then the other request, there was additional pedestrian covers, and those are referenced on page 16, 17, 49. We'd like all that language to be removed, as well as the rating, the Kelvin rating of lighting, as Chris talked about. That's on page 41 and 51. And I'm not sure the Planning Commission wants to consider the negative impacts of blue lighting in your discussion. That seems a little out there. You know, I did a quick search. I didn't really know what blue lighting is particularly, and everything I saw, it has to do with computers mainly and screens, not, you know, lighting that people put up in their yards or in their businesses. So I think that should be struck from the record as well. Those are our requests. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, one more.
Add one more thing, since I haven't had a chance to speak tonight, and am representing the applicant. I'm the traffic engineer that prepared the traffic impact study for this. But I do want to say something. Oh, okay, sorry. Mike Ard with Ard Engineering. My address is 17790 Southwest Dodson Drive. That's D-O-D-S-O-N in Sherwood, Oregon, 97140. As I prepared the traffic study for this project, one of the things that I had to consider was the long-range future of the transportation system, because there was a zone change done on this property at some point in the past, but without a long-range picture of how that zone change affected the transportation system. So when we worked with ODOT, they said we need to look out 20 years into the future to year 2038. And as part of that analysis, what I had to look at is what's the build-out potential for this site. So I had to consider not just the near term, what does it look like to build this building, this gas station and convenience store, but also what's the transportation system going to look like when that new building is added. And there's been a little bit of discussion about whether that building is real or whether it's sort of faked in to meet the intent of the code. And my perspective on that is that building is very real, and for a good reason. That property has significant value. And in the near term, it's going to be a septic drain field, which means that it's undevelopable. But we do know that eventually those sandy services are going to come to the site. And at that time, that value of the property can't be realized unless a building is constructed. So this site plan lays out the template of not only what the immediate development looks like, but what that long-term development looks like. And as your staff said, the purpose of the code is to look out into the future and figure out what the city of Sandy is supposed to look like. So we are planning for that future here, and that's why that building was included there. So the intent is that it's real. It certainly was treated as real in my analysis in terms of transportation impacts, and in fact we had to have a code or a condition of approval rather that addresses what we need to do to the transportation system at the time that that second building is constructed. So from my perspective, I do think that that building is very real, and I do think that we've shown proper foresight in looking out at that future, at what the city of Sandy is going to look like and what your needs are, and we've responded to those appropriately.
Well, I have a question. Here's my open.
Yes.
So my read of all of what's in the record is that the analysis with the future building is not necessarily whatever retail may be in that building, but a worst case scenario like for a bank and a planning horizon analysis.
That's absolutely correct. That's
So-
required by Oregon law.
It looks to me like that additional turn lane outside of what's already conditioned would be necessary for some worst case development, but I didn't see any analysis that tied that to a building of that size with some spec, occupancy.
You're correct. There's a presumption that an additional building will trigger the need for additional mitigation. It's predicated on the fact that if you look at the year of build-out conditions, for the PM peak hour, the addition of the turn lanes that we recommended make things better. For the AM peak hour, it's about the same as what it is under background conditions. So the presumption is that any further deterioration during the AM peak hour is going to require further mitigation. So it won't really matter if it's that worst case scenario or if it's just a more generic development on that site. It's going to require something.
Okay. Sorry, were you gonna ask a question?
No, I'm just saying. You're talking more technical than I am.
He just moved booze around.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, now I'll do some explaining. Ray and Tracy are familiar with our routine where typically if you've been in other public hearings, at this point we would close the public hearing and have our discussion. However, that can be cumbersome if we have a question that the applicant can answer. We have to reopen the public hearing, ask the question, get the answer, close the public hearing, and it's just a pain. So our tradition has been from this point on, we technically will keep the public hearing open, but only for us, for the purpose of us asking the applicant a question. So I usually tell the public and the audience is now is your time to listen as we discuss, but the reason it's kept open is so if we ask Ray a question or Tracy that we can do that without having to reopen and all, so.
I just want to say one more thing real quick, sorry. I just wanted, the only thing I want to say is, that as you probably looked at the finding, or the final order, the kind of staff report final order that staff did, there's a lot of information in there. What I focused on are the conditions that we had concerns about. I didn't go through and look at every bold, underlined, red point that they had noted. So I'm really concerned. So I hope you don't get to the point of saying, and all the other recommendations contained in the final order, because it's almost impossible to do that without days and days and days time to go through it, because there's so much repetition. So that I'd like you to focus, if possible, on the items that we identified. That would be appreciated. Thank you.
All right. Who was taking notes? I'm just gonna run through my list of, what I picked up with the discussion points, the decision points, and then you guys can add. These are in no particular order, other than the order that I wrote them down. LED lighting.
Check.
Is something that we look at. The pedestrian shelters has come up.
Check.
Question of what is the activated frontage?
Check.
Yep.
The window code.
Check.
Yep.
Tree retention, tree code.
Check.
The Kelvin's standard.
Check.
On the lights, and the buffer percentage. What did I miss?
Well, the key thing is the 40 versus 50 foot and the 20 versus 24 foot, the first two things that are the
Is that
type
the
two.
buffer?
The two adjustments, yeah.
Yeah,
Two adjustments.
I had that at the top of my list.
You're good note taking, good job.
Yeah. Now we have to look.
I had all the same ones you had, so.
Did you?
So-
Okay. Well, let's kind of, I think, yeah, knock off the easy ones if we can address them, and then we'll hopefully be able to try and pull things together. This is a complex. I have gained a renewed appreciation of staff and their work. To have worked on this particular one was a lot of work and a lot of words, and I appreciate that. It does not go unnoticed. Okay, let me quickly go back to the two adjustments.
I think that's probably the big key part, is dealing with the proposed building or not. And, because from there, then we're into details of the building or whatever, because if we choose not to go that route, then it seems like they would have to back up and apply for a special variance. I'm correct.
Okay, but just refresh our memory, they're requesting two adjustments to the code. Type 2 adjustment to section 1790-120D1 to decrease the percent of required street frontage from 50% to 40%. That's with the two buildings, the proposed and the future and the proposed.
Phase 1, phase 2.
Yeah.
Jerry, can we just have a point of clarification?
Yes.
Yeah.
From our attorney on adjustments and whether you can put extra conditions on them and stuff like that.
Oh.
So, yeah, there was mention of that, and typically you'll see you won't see conditions and variances and adjustments because they're usually pretty straightforward. We need a setback variance. We need to make something happen. However, the code itself generally authorizes the city to impose approval conditions generally and also specifically in order to allow an application to meet other applicable criteria. So if the planning commission identifies or staff suggests a means by which a criterion can be satisfied by the imposition of an approval criteria, the city's allowed to impose that to make that criteria, to satisfy that criteria.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It might later on. Or it
Okay.
might make more sense.
I just wanted a point of clarification because it was brought up by the applicant that
Yeah.
we impose conditions and it's not really allowed by the code, and
But
I
it
don't
is.
find that to be true.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That was the only point of order that I wanted to get clarification on.
Okay. The other requested adjustment is to 1790-120D1 also, to increase the required street frontage setback from 20 feet to 24 feet.
The, one question I had just off the bat was looking at the site plan, and I'm just looking at the, well, the building is here. The building, I guess, is 20 feet from so it meets that, but the edge of the pad with where the gas stations are is further back. Okay.
So the convenience store was not, or the fueling station was not
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah, got it,
that,
okay.
that adjustment applies to the proposed building.
Yeah.
Future
So to me, you know, to take in a logical order, you know, either you accept the fact that the future building is, we're okay with or not, you know, because if you're not okay with the future building, then everything else kind of tumbles out. If you're okay with the future building, then you can say, now you've included your calculations, and now you're into deciding, is it okay to go from 50 to 40, because now the building is there. So to me, the very first thing is the commission okay with accepting the hypothesis that there's a future building would be there as lined out, because everything tumbles from that.
Yeah. I guess I just need a clarification before we go into that. So I was following the 50% to 40%, but then I heard 33%. Where did I hear that?
That's the tree frontage.
That's
That's
the
trees.
trees.
Oh, okay.
Trees have
Okay.
to be 33% of the frontage.
Right, got it.
30%,
Okay.
and they have 33.
And they have 33, got it.
Okay.
But that 40% includes this future building?
Proposed building, yeah.
Okay.
The future building.
Yeah.
That's how they came up to 40%.
I guess that is, there's a lot of things about this that I could make my way through. I really would have preferred to see a special variance. I feel like if we start getting things and people say, well, this future thing that we don't even have plans for yet is why you should allow us to do X, Y, and Z. That's gonna open up a lot of worms, a lot of cans. I mean, everything is predicated on that future building, and when? 50 years from now? I mean, are we gonna start making our decisions about things that something might exist someday out in the future?
I had the same questions written down on my notes. It just said when.
Yeah.
And what's the timing of it all?
Yeah.
Because I was left uncertain of the, you know, the conclusiveness of that building. Not saying it's fictitious at all. I'm
Right.
just saying, I can't predict when it's gonna be there. Is it in 10
Right.
years? Is it in 40 years? And if I'm gonna make a decision for this land today, how do I do that with a hypothesis? And
Right.
even though I like the proposal.
Yeah, there's a lot of
it
things
made
I like,
sense.
but
So I kind of feel with you, it was steered in my mind, I was thinking it should have been a variance request for this as well.
Well, I think we have to assume it will be. It's in the city. There's lots of vacant commercial and industrial property all around there. So I guess in my mind, it's more a question of if it has to be time certain or not. But I think we should assume that it will, because it's in the city's urban growth boundary and has a
It's in the city limits, yeah.
It's coming.
But if you think about other proposals of things that might be built in the city, and somebody says, well, I'm gonna build this other thing, and you say, yeah, that's in the city limits, that land's gonna be worth something. But if
Well,
it's a condition of what's being built, then.
But I think when we heard this the first time, which was, the first decision, I believe, was that they did not have to extend the city services out, that we were okay with them. The rationale the applicant gave, which was the cost to dig in the ditch. Once you get the ditch dug, if you put water, sewer, and cable in or not, but the point was the cost. Because if they said they did that, then they couldn't justify, my understanding was they couldn't justify the investment for the building. There'd have to be more built, okay? So that's where the chicken and the egg comes from. That, you could have a building out there and you could be all lined up with tenants, a State Farm agent and a beauty shop and whatever you're gonna put in there. But you gotta be able to run that sewer line, which has got a cost that you probably know and they probably know better than I know. So, I'm a little frustrated too, in a way, because I felt like we kind of heard the same argument the last time we were here on our third application on the duplex, that the applicant talked to staff, they were given some thoughts, and they went down one path, but then they get to us, and we kind of go, and say maybe a different path. And that's not very productive for the applicant, in any way, shape, or form. So So I think puts the planning commission a little bit in a bind. So, I mean, I guess I'm concerned about, at least these last two, why the applicant has gone down a path. When it comes to us, we all are thinking maybe a little bit differently, so that we can be more business friendly with the applicant. Because I think the more straightforward would be a special variance, you know, et cetera. Where I'm kind of okay with the extra building, because I do think it may show up at some point in time. But to me, the mitigating factor is the majority, at least half of the area where that building would be, this drawing is correct, has got those large trees. Right here. I don't care if you put the building there or not, you aren't gonna see it. So what's, you know, the purpose of the street frontage is obviously, you know, to, you know, it's a C2 zone and et cetera. But, you know, if you cut all the trees down, then obviously it's different. But, you know, if those trees remain, and even if the building was to be built, their criteria for maintaining 30% of that street frontage to meet the tree retention on the, would be in those trees. Cause you know, to me, the 6 trees is going to round off. I'm okay with the 6 trees going away. You know, I agree with Ray, I said, and we know why you guys are working on the pre-code. It's like, well, what standard am I gonna meet? And the standard you mentioned, it's pretty clear. You can count noses, come up with 7, and you got 13. It seems like you've got plenty of trees and plenty of screening that's there. So because of the trees that are there, you're gonna see the building anyway. To me, that's where it gets a little bit academic. So I'm kind of okay personally assuming the building and proceeding, though I do believe a special variance would be the more of a front door way to do it.
That's all I was saying. I like the plan of what they have for the property. I'm in favor of it. I would have preferred to see a special variance, but I don't see any reason to not allow it with the adjustment, as long as it doesn't impede us for future decisions. That's what I'm more concerned about.
Yeah, that's what council said, you know, that it's basically a quasi-judicial hearing, so
it's not
as long as our
affecting
rationale is adequately written up, people always come to point notes. I mean, we heard it from them today. They walk up the Chevron station, up you're 7,500, up you're 5. Well, doesn't make any difference. We're here, and in fact, but the Chevron was put in maybe 15 years ago. What was the code then versus now? The ARCO, now that's a little more applicable to recent times. You know, if you say that's 5,000, I mean, that was put up just a few years ago, okay?
7 years ago?
So.
How long, that was still.
It was like 8 years ago.
That was 8 years ago.
7 or 8 years ago,
Yeah.
somewhere in there.
So with that.
So that's not current.
Yeah.
What, the
Consensus
ARCO?
on the first
Yeah.
piece?
Yeah, John's.
That
got
I
it.
was
It seemed like we just battled that.
No, it was
thing.
more than 8 years.
Let's knock off the
actually.
first
More
one
than
first
8 years.
before we debate the
Yeah,
other.
I
I
don't
thought we
wanna-
just had that battle last week.
No, it's been more than 8
Uh,
years.
Maybe it's because that owner I
be
keep
linear
seeing in
here.
front of us.
Type 2 adjustment.
Just-
chime
all
in
right,
with
quick-
mine.
anyway,
I'll start
I think-
getting anxious.
That's not wrong.
I need to get my gavel out. You guys get your.
Well, that's why you got it, buddy.
Yeah, but it's not supposed to be for the ones up here.
We are an unruly bunch at times, aren't we?
So can I just make a point of clarification too? That I think staff is for the special variance as well. I want
Yes.
to be very clear about that. They asked us what another option was besides the special variance, so it didn't have to come before planning commission. And I threw that out there as an option, just like we did with the duplex.
That if they built another building.
That if they proposed another building, that could be a
Proposed.
way potentially to get an adjustment and meet the code. And then from there, we added conditions, like I stated, to approve the adjustment. So I agree with you that a special variance would have been the best route. They asked staff, how can we potentially approach this without going to planning commission? And that was the suggestion I gave Mr. Brown.
And then you gave the variance.
And we approved it, and then they appealed it to you tonight, so.
I think we make suggestions, you need to put a probability on it, the planning
Yeah.
commission's gonna buy off on it. Because, you know, everything's a possibility, but what's a
Yeah.
probability?
But
So
you
I guess the other option though was to say, no, we'll deny it flat out,
Yeah.
and you have to go to planning commission. So
Yeah.
instead of doing that, I was saying, here's another potential option,
Yeah, you're
which,
trying to be helpful,
which
man.
staff approved. That's what I'm saying. We approved
Yeah.
it. We gave them
Yeah.
approval
I-
with
I-
the
go ahead.
proposed building or future building or whatever.
Yeah.
So I just want to be very clear on that.
Did you have something, counsel?
No,
Okay.
no, it's not germane.
All right.
I have my 2 cents worth, probably
Alright.
1 cent. And that is, I wish it had been a special variance as well. I'm not crazy about the proposed future building, for a couple of reasons. One is, we don't know when. I understand the whole sewer thing. But the other one too is our code is to have a commercial building. The parking is either in front of it, you park to the side, or in back of it. And there's, that building, when it gets built, the front of the building is gonna be the berm, where the trees are. Okay, so, I mean, as you go by, the front of the building now becomes the back of it, and according to our definition, because it's facing Highway 26, the proposed building. So, if there's gonna be a proposed building, I'm not sure why it wasn't put up on Orient. As we're leaving that berm there. So, I understand that what we're trying to do to finagle it in, but it just fails in its location to me, on a couple of different reasons I just stated. So again, having it there and being a commercial building with the, we're talking about being pedestrian friendly. There's gonna be a big berm with this building there that people are gonna have to go over to get into the front of. It doesn't make sense where it's at. So I think that's something that should be re-looked at if there's a future building, and again, trying to figure out maybe why Orient Drive wasn't used as the frontage as opposed to Highway 26, given the physical barriers that's there.
I don't think the berm though will be there. The berm is primarily
the
to
trees are on
Further
top there.
down.
east.
No, this is flat, this is.
The
berm
grading
is
plan
further
shows
down.
it coming
Yeah,
down.
it's a very light.
We still got the trees down there though.
Yeah.
They're holding.
The trees are there.
Yeah, it's pretty flat through there.
Okay, yeah, so do we limb up and then have it? I mean, I don't know.
I mean, Mr. Persons can give you a way on this, but if you wanted to approve the decision, one possibility is to deny the adjustments and approve a special variance tonight. So that the frontage requirement would go down from 50% to whatever they presented it as 9-point-some%. There would be no future building shown, so I'd
That
get rid of
seems
that.
more honest.
Yeah.
I mean, it really does.
We could do a
It seems
special
more
variance tonight
clear.
without it being
Do we have to fill out an
noticed and all that
application?
stuff?
I would think so.
Yeah, I would say that, the intent of the special variance is, if we looked at the language in there and you conditioned your approval to meet the intent of the special variance, it would be part and parcel of the application.
Well, we're all here in front of the planning commission, why don't we just do it then, go through the front door?
I think that'd make a lot more sense than looking at this future building
Applicant
anymore.
might wanna talk about that, but.
Well, that's, so.
Anyways, just throwing that out there
Yeah,
as an
no.
option.
I have a question though. Would it be a condition of approval that they secure a special variance? Or are we actually sort of applying and?
No, we are the
approving
guys who
and
say that.
establishing all in one?
We're the okey-dokey guys.
Staff can't approve a special variance, so it's,
No,
it's your,
it's up to
yeah,
us.
it's you.
Right, but
We
I've,
can approve it ourselves right
I've always
now.
sort of operated on, we have to evaluate what's proposed. And if a special variance wasn't proposed, do we have the authority to do that?
That's what Dave, that's what we just said.
So what my answer is that you would be approving the special variance as part of what they propose, and it's just in lieu of the building, the future building that, based on the discussion of the rest of the planning commission saying isn't happening, you're saying, but the way that to affect an approval of what's proposed is as part of the approval granting the special variance. And actually, in the staff report, there's kind of, when they walk through your options, that's kind of laid out as one of the
So,
options.
I think we're in agreement of heading that route, and so however, the verbiage is to get that done.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm there for that.
And that would,
You are?
And we still have to talk about some of these other.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There's
Oh, yeah.
more
Okay.
issues, but I could go along with that, yeah.
and that would be a special variance that would just allow them on this big frontage to have a much smaller building frontage.
9-point-some%, yep.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. I mean, I would prefer that approach.
And, I mean, the
I feel more
staff's
comfortable.
findings, what the order that gets signed is gonna have to walk through those, criteria for the special variance and make findings of compliance based on the direction of the planning commission tonight, but we could do that before a final order was presented for signature.
What section of the code is that?
Okay.
I mean, really, it gives the applicant way more flexibility in the future.
I can find it.
Also, because then he doesn't get stuck with this thing, and then he has to come back through planning commission with.
25 years from now.
Yeah, with a modification to the original approval, yeah, I think it would provide more flexibility to locate the pad where they want to in the future. Than locking it in at this point.
I'm catching consensus on that approach. Correct?
Pardon?
Consensus on that approach.
Maybe
right with that.
we should maybe make sure the applicant's okay with that.
No, we don't have to, it's us.
Yeah,
We're just-
okay.
Sure, it's us. Sure decision.
You don't want us to give you more
Yeah.
flexibility, right?
Don't go there.
Okay, so let's move forward on that assumption.
Okay.
All right? That will kind of address those two adjustments.
Okay, I'm looking at, just for reference, I'm looking at the criteria for approval of special variance, if we can look at it.
Does the second adjustment
17.66.
need to be done?
Page 3.
Pardon?
Does the second adjustment even in consideration, cause isn't that for the new building?
That's correct.
Right.
The
So
second
it's-
adjustment
that's
would
irrelevant.
actually
So it
go
takes care of both
away.
of those.
Relevant now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
both adjustments are, yeah.
It would really address the first adjustment of the required street frontage.
The 20 versus 24 goes away.
Correct, it wouldn't have to be
You wouldn't
concerned
have
with
to do
that
that.
because the existing building is at 20.
Good.
We're not concerned about any building.
I'm gonna take council's word that we can do the special variance tonight. So we'll worry about that in the motion when we get there. We still have these other issues that are in the proposal that we do need to look at, though.
Could we
Yeah,
do
there's-
two that I think might be relatively easy for us?
Which two?
The LED and the Kelvin lighting.
Right.
I'm
The
hoping they're
LED
easy for
lighting?
us. The LED,
Well-
the LED lighting around
Yeah.
the soffit area,
Yeah.
and then the Kelvin lighting, color temperature.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I do wanna say that as a psychotherapist, the blue lighting is a real thing in terms of human health. And it's being linked to depression and seasonal affective disorder and all kinds of things. So yes, we're not specialists here in lighting, but let's not pretend that it doesn't exist. Blue lighting's not gonna be as good for us. I can live with the Kelvin that they're proposing, if we eliminated any direct LED, like the red stripe. I could almost, if, depending on how other people felt, the recessed red LED would be acceptable to me. So if they were able to recess it also in the pump area, then I could get it
Mhm.
on board. But it's, that red LED, that space look is not Sandy style. It's not anywhere near, you're at the gateway of Mount Hood. It's not the look we're going for. And I'd really rather not have the red light. I'd rather have a painted strip.
But,
That's my thoughts.
okay, but you're okay with it?
I can live with it.
I guess I
If
would
the
say
rest of-
mine is I'm a little bit opposite of that when it comes to the lighting. My background is retail. I believe the red is an accent that stands out the brand. I do agree. I wrote recessed on my notes. I would like to, I don't wanna see it on the outside like a rope light around the roof. I'd like to see it up recessed, so it gives more of a glow, not a glare. And it would only be at night, and I think the paint might not do the same kind of service in the evenings. As far as the Kelvin lighting, I work for the state, I'm in distribution, I have warehouses. I think anything at 4,800 is pretty good. It's like almost direct sunlight. So and what they're recommending, I think, is below that. So I was okay with their Kelvin lighting, just my opinion.
Well, the other one too is I think there's a key word that was in, and that was the word safety. You gotta keep in mind we're lighting a gas pump area. Okay, so, you need to have adequate intensity for safety, considering what the use is.
Okay.
Well,
So,
I'll jump in about
Yeah.
those two items too. I think I'm in a similar camp as Chris. If the LED's recessed so it glows like that, I think that would be acceptable. I don't think there's any authority in the code for us to specify a Kelvin rating of any kind. so I'm not inclined to include it. I mean, kinda like the
Is
tree
that right?
ordinance, the dark sky ordinance.
Yeah, the dark
needs
sky
work too.
ordinance.
Those are two, I think, target areas where the code needs work, but I don't
Mhm.
think we can then just apply
Set
what we
it
want.
right on the
Yeah,
building.
right.
I would, on the LED lighting, I feel the same way, except I would, and when we do end up with our final order, motion and so forth on all of these, let's not talk about recessed. I think what we're talking about, cause recessed can be straight, can be recessed into a
Oh,
board
good
that you can
point.
actually still look
Good
at.
point.
We want, I don't know what the term would be, to actually be behind it,
Is that a soffit?
indirect maybe?
Is that a soffit?
That you
Or
cannot,
shrouded?
pardon?
Shrouded, maybe?
Shrouded, yeah,
Shrouded, backlit.
If,
it just,
yeah, I personally don't have a
That's
problem
one of the
with
things, we
either
need the
way.
right word, but we know what
Well-
we're talking
Recessed
about.
or not. I mean, you go drive by the Shell station that we were talking about earlier, I mean, it's bright all the way around, and it really sticks out.
right.
If you look
and-
at
and
it,
we-
I haven't noticed it until it was
But we,
mentioned.
I like the,
My
the
recommendation,
wash.
make the canopy look like that. Okay? Now, where that's done.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
they gave
it's
us a
got,
picture.
it's got a facade, it's got something in front of it.
It's not directly, yeah, it's backwash.
It's behind and it's a wash of light. Anyway, that was just my thought, so that, cause we don't,
And I understand where the red's important. to the
otherwise,
It's like under a soffit.
we might get a silver roof. On the Kelvin standards, Todd, you saying that we really you don't feel we have the code to support a particular Kelvins?
I don't think so. Isn't that what, I know we've dealt with this before.
You do.
We
I mean,
do.
you can follow the IES manual for Kelvin, and that's
That's
what they're
what it
recommending
refers
right now,
to.
is not to exceed 4125.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, the applicant doesn't believe that, that's what it says, but that's what it says. And
Yeah, I mean, he showed us one that was 4,000 that was available, so, you know, that's the intent. Move on.
Yeah.
So do you guys want the Kelvins to be 4125 or less?
Yes.
Well, I'm trying to track what you guys are wanting us to do.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the
Understand.
code doesn't say that, but if the standard says that, then
It's
that's.
standard
Well, the
says
IES
that.
standard says that, and the code says that you should go with the current IES standards.
Okay.
Okay,
So that's what we're going with.
Is,
Yeah. And they said the example that he provided, it's available, so.
Yeah, no, they can meet it.
Yeah, it is
I think
available.
Was the
they're
IES
writing-
standard 4125? 4125?
Then that's what
And
we're
they're
doing.
saying they can provide 4,000.
Done.
Okay, I'm good with that.
okay. Pedestrian shelters, yeah. That-
So it's
okay.
hard to tell by the renderings, but there's coverings over all the doorways, is that right?
Yeah, it's
Yes.
the ones with
Yes.
the dash.
And
Yeah,
then
the
there's
dash
some
lines.
additional ones, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure where else we would.
I think if you look at
want
their
to-
site plan, it kind of dots out some covered shelters on there.
Yeah,
So I think like a strict reading of the code would say you need a 5-foot overhang over 3 sides of the building, which seems pretty.
Yeah,
that's a lot.
yeah. And maybe from your car to the front door.
That would be, this view here gives you a little better idea, because they have some stuff
Yeah.
over the windows, et cetera.
Yeah,
that
I got that one.
Depending on how far they stick out.
Yeah, I couldn't tell over the main door, though. It didn't look like there was one over the main door. I
Yeah,
saw the other.
They are.
It's got these-
That's an
Two?
extended.
Okay.
That's
There's
this
these
one
things
right
that come
here.
out over the windows.
Oh, okay.
That's
I don't know
what
if
it
they come
is.
out over the
It's
sidewalk.
much higher.
So it's, I think the questions, do you want more, or are you fine with what's proposed, or?
I mean, what I see here, I think is fine personally.
I'm fine
That's
with
one of
it.
my
I
biggest
think it's
questions
fine,
when it
too.
comes to articulated windows and stuff.
Mhm.
Are these drawings what we're talking about? Cause I got confused in terms of extra windows or this or that. You know, picture worth 1,000 words. We just walk around the building and the picture is what's being proposed, and that's what we run with.
And that's what I was gonna ask, as long as this picture represents what would be actually built, then I'm okay with what's shown.
Yeah, and all we have to do is compare to the Tractor Supply. We gotta remember that a window is, we gotta make sure we define what a window is.
Yeah, well, let's not go to
We
windows.
saw
yet.
we saw the picture, we saw the
Let's
picture at
not
that
go
meeting
to
too.
windows. Okay, what I'm picking up is that we feel, we are okay with the shelters that are proposed, that, with the dotted lines around on the,
I would
Yes.
just, go on record.
next to the last page.
Let's
Yeah,
have a question, a
I
little
think
bit.
that's okay, I just would go on record, just for the applicant, that the flat overhangs that are over the other windows, I think you'd be well served, your customers are gonna be happy if you put one over the main door, because the overhang that's up really high is not gonna keep anybody dry as they're running to and from the door. So,
Yeah.
I mean, when they're getting their umbrella out or whatever, they're not gonna have shelter. So we don't have to require it, I just think it would be a good idea.
Okay, did you capture that, Kelly?
What's that?
Did you capture that, our thoughts on the pedestrian shelters?
Yeah, I'm trying to capture them all, and then at the end I'm gonna reread them to you.
Okay.
So that I know that what you guys want out of this.
Okay, let's tackle the activated frontage.
You know, I thought, that was kind of interesting, 'cause we actually went through a long discussion with, on, storage unit down here a while back, where we actually, that was part of our was to define the activated frontage. They wanted to know before they designed. So, I thought that was something that was, the activated frontage is what faces the street. That's what
Yeah.
we used before with the storage unit, because we said, well, that isn't gonna
Right.
face the street, or it's gonna have a bank or three, so we weren't worried about it. So, it seems to me like the activated frontage is what faces the street. On the other hand, based on what they're proposing, it looks fine. I mean, when I look on the south elevation,
Yeah.
to me, the south elevation or the west elevation, whichever you call activated, if they build what they have here, I think it's fine.
I think it's fine as well. They've gone and met what's been asked of it. And I think we need to really, I'd like to go back and look at the activation side and look at the door per se that we have here, that we put on the side. I don't believe it's gonna be used, okay? And I think that to require it, or to have something faux there, I'm perfectly fine with. But we're just kinda kidding ourselves. I think the real thing is to have something that looks nice as we drive by. Nobody, you have to go around and come in. The building, all four sides, I think, look great. And if there's some internal windows that are faux, or external ones that are faux because of coolers, et cetera, so be it. That's there. I mean, I think it's gone a little too far.
My question I wrote for that kind of pertains to that, maybe you can help clarify it for me. Was that door on that south side asked to be put there because of future pedestrian traffic coming down 26?
Our code reads that
would be-
you have to have that door there because it faces
That's the main.
active side.
No, the code actually states that you have to have a door within 40 feet of the building corner because there's two streets intersecting. So you would have to grant a special variance if that door was an actual door. It's different than the Tractor Supply store where we were just trying to make it a little more activated looking and there's a door. This the code section relevant here is because you have Orient Drive and Highway 226 intersecting, and because of that, you have to have a door, like a real door, within 40 feet of the corner of the building. So that's why it's required.
So what's up with
Okay,
the
that's
ARCO
fine.
then?
It's
The
there,
ARCO
if
rate
used or not,
is
I
2.9.
can see that if way over time, it develops out there and there's a sidewalk on 26 and then there's a sidewalk into that door,
I
so
think
somebody
it's
walks in from
wise.
the street. That's might
That's
be
a great question.
And
down the road.
that's a busy intersection.
But, and I agree with, on the windows, if they're full windows, I just like to make sure that there's a reason for that. Because what I see is we have some, but I think there's an excuse for the person to use advertising. For example, on the side of the Walgreens example, the purpose of windows is to connect the inside of the building with the people on the outside, it's space. That's why we kind of require windows, and if you can't see through them, okay, then they don't function. But at the other hand, I understand 100% if on this north, on the south elevation, for example, if this is coolers that are along this wall, well, yeah, this is the way it ought to look, because it's stupid to look in the back of coolers. But the point is that there's gotta be, I'd just like to see a reason. You're looking into the restroom, you're looking into the janitor's room. As long as there's a reason behind why it's that way, then I'm fine, as opposed to just.
Yeah, and the code gives that in that, kind of that escape route with the internal function of the building. Does say that you can have them up or down below the particular, what was it, 3-foot height. And I'm looking at the picture of the south elevation. As I understand it, the tops of those windows, where it says active, are actually glass windows.
Light emitting through those.
Yeah,
So
let
those
light
are
in.
light, there's glass along there. That, to me, is using the standard of allowing, because of the function inside, we can go up or down, and that is going up. Now, I'm not sure about if it would meet any square inch requirement that we may have, but I see that as the,
A win-win, actually.
yeah, yeah. And on the north elevation, where there's, some are active and then there's an inactive or spandrel, obviously there's something behind that.
Right.
There's a reason that that's on.
Yeah, I just
I
like
have
it-
no problems with.
I like to make sure that
what's-
our wording, when we approve that there is function behind it, that through their final plans that are approved by the city, with interior function, that there's something there behind it.
I don't agree. I mean, the building could be repurposed down the road, and
Exactly.
who knows? I mean, again, I'm after the aesthetics of driving by. Does it look nice? And I think that the person running it, to have it light and bright with windows, the more you can have, the better. Okay? But if there's a functional reason why, I don't think you have to prove it. I think you just have to make it look nice to me on the outside. Not look like a cheap faux window, but anyway.
I just like to make sure we don't get Tractor Supply again.
Well, I agree.
I mean, we sat right here, I remember talking to Kelly halfway through that construction, and we're looking at that, and he going, they're gonna be taking a jackhammer to that thing if they don't change it, right? So, I mean, everybody was under the impression that place was gonna have windows. Which is why I printed off the definition of windows today from the Oxford Dictionary. And those don't qualify,
I think
but they're there.
I think the big difference is when you drive by having it, they met the thing, it's their building, for whatever reason, they don't wanna have the windows. But I think the city won because we got a much nicer
It
looking
looks much
facade.
nicer, yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And they got what they wanted.
Uh-huh. In this case, though,
Yeah.
I think, I mean, at least there's some activated
Yeah.
ones. I think that the purpose of a window in terms of safety is important. And, you can have all the cameras in the world, and then the trees knock the electrical grid out, and you don't, you can't see.
That's why you
And
have
so
electric-
as a woman, I'm really aware of, when there's windows, I feel safer walking along.
My
than when
point
there's not.
is, we should know what we're approving, and then we ought to get it. And if we approve something we can see through, and it shows up like what's on the Tractor Supply store, that's a bait and switch.
Okay.
Bottom line.
Well,
should
that's-
also consider
So if
Don't
we
bait
knew
and
that was
switch.
what was gonna be there, that's fine, we approved it.
We
Right.
should
That's
also
not what we
consider
approved
practical
when we were here,
functionality
in
of
our
inside
minds.
the building. They're building a C-store and a gas station. That C-store is gonna have cold box in it. Cold box can only go against the wall. You don't want the back of the coolers looking to the windows. You want all the windows on the front where the people are walking through, where you have all the pedestrian traffic, and you have it on the other facing where you have a partial of the door. But then the remainder of that wall that hits 26 is gonna have coolers on it. So if you're looking for aesthetics from the way the building looks, making that glass where it's not see-through is good. And it's also got potential future purpose. So I think by having it the way they have it drawn, gives them great functionality within the space that, what they're using it for,
And it
and
still
gives
looks good.
Sandy style look from the outside.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we beat the windows up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Is there anything we need
the
to decide on?
activating though, what is triggered, is it important that we decide tonight determine which is the activated front side, does that trigger certain things other than our discussion we just had?
I mean, I don't really know if it's, I mean, it's 10 o'clock. I don't know if it's that productive to try to, I mean, I think in a future code rewrite, I think we should be more specific on that and really dive into that. I think for the purposes of tonight, if you say, you know, it's your decision. So if you say the building look and the orientation is fine, I don't think we really need to get into the nitty-gritty of.
Okay.
I think the building looks
If you
and
want to
orientation
declare
is
the
fine.
west
Fine.
elevation,
Okay.
if you want to declare the west elevation as the activated frontage, that's fine. I mean,
But
that's
it may
how we'll-
not do
That's how we'll
anything.
write the staff report up.
Yeah,
It's your
but
decision.
it doesn't help anything. Does it?
Is there anything that tumbles to them?
Well, it seems,
Yeah.
it
Does
seems
it
like.
trigger anything?
I mean, I do think if you were to say that one door wasn't needed, the one's facing south, I think you would be looking at, that's not an activated frontage thing, that's another code section, as I've
Yeah.
explained. So I think if you were to change that, we'd have to look a little deeper. But if we're not gonna change that, I don't think we really need to spend a ton of time on deciding. We'll call the west elevation the activated frontage. It is weird that it doesn't have to be the road.
Yeah.
Actually, why don't we call the south one the activated frontage, and then because it does face the road. And
I think then they're not meeting certain code
Then
criteria.
they're not meeting the code for
Yeah.
that. If people are coming and going from the pumps, that needs to be activated.
Yeah.
To me, that's the activated,
That's just
the
the
one you
logical
use.
one.
It's the where
I
the
know it's a
people are gonna
logical
be.
one, but again, the way it's written, it's supposed to be facing the orientation of the street. I know what door everybody's gonna use. Okay?
Yeah, we all
I'm
do.
just saying is, so I'm just calling that one the side door. The one along Highway 26 is the main door. The smaller
So,
of the two.
I'm a little confused on what you guys decided on the windows. There's a lot of
I think
discussion
what
there.
we decided, if I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong, that what we see in the plans
Distributed
Where it
tonight.
says active.
tonight, that say active on the top, I don't know how these compare to the plans in the staff report.
I think they're the same ones.
But
So-
they,
Same ones.
they indicate on the south and the north walls that there are active windows above.
Right. So, you,
And
But not
so
all
you're
of
fine
them.
with what the plans show? Are you?
Yes.
I guess the thing I'm trying to get, do you want them to be dark gray, the spandrel, instead of black? So they look less reflective, kind of like what Tractor Supply looks like?
What is actually
The
gray?
applicant's saying that they're fine with dark gray.
Well, that's
Yeah, that's
fine.
fine.
Or
Looks
light
better.
gray.
But
We
see,
don't want them
where-
to look like Tractor Supply.
Where Kelly's getting at, I think where Kelly's getting at is, for
Want them to
example,
look like windows.
in the staff report, it says, the 3 windows to the right, they want them to be active. Well, the whole windows down below. That's
Yeah.
what was in
I-
the staff report, so we gotta,
Okay.
that's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah,
is
we're
We're saying this is
referencing-
all fine, but they recommended a few things, and so when we say this is fine, we're saying, no, that's okay, those don't have to be.
Correct.
active.
You're saying the recommendation in the staff report by staff, you're not following, you're going.
Right,
the
that's what I'm
applicant
trying to
is-
get to, because you're
as
gonna.
proposed.
Because you only
Correct.
have about 100 things in your
Correct.
right up here
I
that
know.
you recommend.
That's what I'm just trying to get some
Tracy, do you have some input for us?
So yeah, anything that is shown as the spandrel, which is the dark color, the architect was proposing to put in kind of a light gray with a blue tint, so it gives it a little extra flair rather than just a blacked out. So that, we're fine with that.
Okay.
And then all the other windows that are shown in a lighter color would be clear
Glass, regular glass, okay.
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 I concur with the window.
I think we haven't done the trees though, we haven't actually.
We haven't done the
We've gotta
trees yet.
save that.
We're done with windows?
What's next?
Yeah, we're done
I think
with
we did,
windows.
we're good with windows.
Can I just walk through what I have so far?
Sure.
So the adjustments, deny the 2 requested adjustments. Special variance, approve a special variance to allow the building frontage along Highway 26 at 9.5%. LED lighting, the red lighting is allowed but should be shrouded. Kelvins, 4,125 kelvins or less. Pedestrian shelters, the elevations for pedestrian shelters are fine, no changes needed. Activated frontage, the elevations are fine, the west elevation is the activated frontage. Windows, allow the windows as proposed by the applicant, but require the spandrel windows to be light gray with blue tint.
Yep.
We
Is that
just had
correct?
to
You
talk
got
about
it.
trees.
It's looking good.
I just wanna make sure I got those ones correct so far.
Okay.
On the trees.
Now, in the spirit of Christmas, let's go to green trees. I think the biggest issue is those 6 trees.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, if we don't have the proposed building, are we gonna be able to even leave more trees?
His concern on the 6 trees is the site,
Yeah.
aside from the highway to see the.
I
Which
guess
is
I just
why-
had,
These are the
I had
trees
one
that are
question that I
further
think
down.
would help get away from all of that,
Mm.
is excluding those 6 trees, does the current trees proposed that are standing meet the code? And what I heard, they do. So
That's
why
what
are
Ray
we even
said.
talking about these 6 trees? And that was gonna be my question for staff, cause I don't know why we're stuck on these 6 if they proposed 12 and they only need to keep 11. So I don't know why we're even talking about the 6, and I guess that's why I'm
So,
asking.
we were talking about the 6 because the adjustments.
It was like a
criterion-
trade.
It was a give and take.
It was a give and take. We'll
So you
give
could-
you this
Yeah, and the intent
Correct.
proposed building.
And the intent section of the Sandy style
And I
area. So,
think- yeah.
with the special variance, you could still require that, or you could waive it. It's entirely up to you.
And I think Emily or the city was trying to get a little bit more trees right along Highway 26
To keep
as
them
well.
on the frontage.
And the applicant wants to have a little more visibility.
Correct.
And the side, what's the issue, is the sidewalk right where those trees are?
The proposed side.
Yeah, proposed sidewalk, that's what testimony was.
Well, because they're proposing the sidewalk to hug the property line.
Oh, I see.
So yes, if the sidewalk was placed where they are proposing, then it would be an issue, I believe. We were suggesting to bump the sidewalk away from the trees. Isn't that correct?
Right, like
Yeah.
it is with the other ones, is that?
Like it is with the ones to the west. yeah.
Or it'd just be that you couldn't impact more than 25% within. the
Okay.
I think,
footprints.
I'm okay with the 6 trees being cut, assuming they put in the landscaping that they show, which is lower, I guess is the point. If you wanna meet their kind of, the idea of seeing the gas station, I understand that, but we wanna see vegetation along 26, it's more a question of height. So you rid of the 6 trees, but then I looked at what they proposed here, and they just got a lot of, it's all based on the landscaping plan, obviously, but I'm just looking at this one right here. You know, they have a lot of stuff.
I mean, that is a little bit of a concern for me, at least, is that, so if we remove the 6 trees, okay, let's just say they're removed. The new landscaping going in is gonna be like cedars, well, the dogwood would be fine, but, I mean, there are gonna be some native trees in there that will then block the site a little bit more. I mean, the embankment will be out of there, but there will be some plantings that will reduce visibility, so I hope in the future they wouldn't cut them down.
Right,
Right.
right, there needs
So
to be
I think if you're gonna let the
vegetation
6 trees go, I think at the very least we need a condition that, once this stuff's planted and the cedars get bigger, those are to remain. It's not like 5 years down the road, or 10 years down the road, they start chopping all that stuff up.
Are these gonna be conifers, the bigger
No.
ones you see here? These are they gonna be conifers?
No.
I mean, you got a few cedars.
can't read that.
Scarlet oak,
See, if they're
dogwood.
conifers, I understand what you're saying, but like all
Maple.
of our street trees we've planted, as Ray indicated, are all hardwoods.
Kentucky copper.
And you can, I mean, you prune them up, you can tend to see, they're not gonna obstruct. I would suggest the trees here, it's okay for them to be hardwoods.
I would suggest that we make it, the 6 trees go bye-bye, they can grade it, and the applicant works with staff to determine a long-range plan for trees that will meet the city's, you know, like you said, they're not gonna chop them down in 5 years. Do you think you guys can work out?
Yeah, I
something
mean,
that'll work?
I just wanna be realistic, cause we
Yeah.
work with, we all know
Code
some of the
enforcement
trees
is-
around town that get butchered a lot.
Right.
And I just don't wanna see that happen, like, these trees get
Right.
nice and then 10 years, well, now they're blocking our building.
Right.
We're gonna
Uh-huh.
remove them.
Right.
Well, I would like to speak to that, the visibility issue, which is why I asked where the sign was going to be. When I'm looking for a gas station, I am not looking for a building.
You're looking for the sign.
I'm looking for that sign. If I'm going
That's
down
right.
Burnside, I'm going down Division, you can spot a gas station 6 blocks away by that sign that's out of the street. You don't see the building or
You
anything.
see the Arco sign for where the station's gonna be. But you
Yeah.
can't see the Arco.
Yeah.
Well, and you can't see the
And
shell right
so
away
that,
either.
that was that's why I was
That's
wondering,
right.
I think that being able to see that building is not that critical to, in my mind, to be a reason to not take the trees. Now, that's not an argument, because I would say I'm fine with taking the trees away. But, you know, being worried about them cutting it down, I just don't.
Well, that's important, we know, I do think it's really important to know where the sign is.
I
You
think-
guys have a pretty good idea from where you're gonna put it, even though it may not be.
If the planning commission is interested in considering allowing the removal of those trees, you could, as part of that, you could just impose an additional condition saying that the applicant would obtain a tree removal permit prior to removing any of the trees proposed in the landscape plan. Then that takes care of it. They'd have to come back to the city, and the city would have notice if anything was gonna get cut that's being proposed as part of this application that's before you tonight.
Got that, Kelly?
You can.
What I, if as long
I
as
think
there's
it's a good
street trees,
suggestion.
I understand what you're saying, as long as there's street trees, it seems to me like that's academic, because anybody who cuts a street tree is a violation of city code.
Well, these wouldn't be street trees.
No.
No, I get what you're saying. So the ones in
Yeah.
the right of way, yes, would be, these would just be within this 20-foot area. And I think the code's kind of loose on how much protection, I don't know.
We'll tighten it up next time. right?
Yeah.
When you get to it.
I think it's just a lot more clear, I guess, if there's a condition as Mr. Parsons has recommended, so that both sides know if they want to remove one, they have to apply for a permit, and then we process it.
Okay.
Can I ask a question of the arborist? So, would it be possible, I mean, people are driving along, would it be possible to limb up those trees so that would that still
The
have help
existing
people?
trees,
The
you mean.
existing trees rather than removing?
I think you'd have to limb them up quite a bit.
I don't think they're big enough. I
They're
think
talking about the
Oh.
berm, if the berm
Oh,
needs to come
if
down.
the berm
yeah.
comes down, they come down,
Yeah,
got it.
I keep
Okay.
looking at that picture with the red,
Yeah.
how much red there is.
Yeah, I got it.
Those trees are not that big either, so if you brought them up high enough to see it,
Yeah.
you'd be.
Yeah.
It sort of look like some of the
Yeah.
trees that they cut around power lines,
Got
you
it.
know, that look a little weird.
Next.
Next, okay, thank you. Thank you, Ron.
Sorry.
Keep us moving.
Are we done with the trees?
Yes.
So remove the 6 trees, impose a condition that the applicant not remove any trees without first receiving city approval? Does that sound correct?
Any
And
of
then
the
there's-
planted trees?
No,
right?
or any of the existing trees that are counting,
Yeah, I think it'd be-
counted.
But you were referencing the
I just said trees as proposed in the landscape plan.
So that would be all
Yeah,
of
there's
the
an
trees.
assumption they're gonna build
Oh.
a translate plan,
Yeah.
that you're gonna approve
Yeah,
tactically.
Right.
any trees that are gonna be in the future.
okay.
I think we're done.
I have checks by all mine.
Checked
So,
off everything.
one thing I would like to mention, and we talked to the applicant about this yesterday, so it sounds like they're pretty much getting what they want, I believe, out of this. So, staff is very busy, as you know. We have 3 planning commissions over the next, month and a half.
Oh, I had one other thing if I could add, for you years. Tracy brought up the point, which I don't think is fair, is saying it only applies to this stuff in here. Emily's staff report has all these other detailed things. I think those things all go. So, you know what I'm saying? Is
What?
Tracy at the very, his last comment was, there's a lot of other little things that are pointed out as fact finding in the staff report. And he was asking we just look at these things here tonight, and the other stuff stays by the wayside. I don't know how we can do that. I don't mean to misstate what Tracy was saying.
The new stuff.
We've always
Yeah.
said that, and anything that's in bold, we just
Yeah.
carry forward unless we've changed it.
So,
Everything that's not what we discussed here goes with what the staff had suggested.
Yeah, that's what we've always done, so I don't,
Yeah.
I heard Tracy
Yeah.
say that, and I just said, well, I don't know if
We're
you're
not
gonna do
asking
with that,
you.
but.
You're not asking.
no. No. I mean, that was, he was looking for that to be excluded, but we are.
We're
including
still, yeah,
okay.
we're still
I'm
including
not
it.
sure, I think
And I,
maybe hope
and I
is-
do wanna just say, I think it's important that, felt a little bit like Tracy, was throwing the staff under the bus, and I think they need to make sure that he knows what's expected, he's been the planning director, and you guys just need to talk ahead of time. Yeah.
So
Thank you.
I guess the thing I was getting at is we'll write this up exactly how you guys approve it. I mean, that's our job. But I think we need a little more time because the 120-day clock runs out tomorrow.
Mhm.
We're not going to be able to, I don't think,
No.
generate this, especially with all the other. We have another hearing coming up in in 2 weeks from
2
tonight.
weeks from tonight.
And we have a lot to prepare for that.
Mm-hmm.
So
We could meet it by just denying it all and walk away.
I'm
serious.
So the applicant sounded like if they got what they wanted tonight out of this, that they would be willing to extend the clock. So I would ask if they would be generous enough to do that tonight and then give
Okay.
us a time that they would extend it to.
It's probably March 15th.
He
It's
does
the
want to,
holidays.
spend Christmas Day with
With
his
his family,
Um,
yes.
And maybe a New Year's party.
No New Year's party. Do you think January 15th is achievable? I think it is.
It's one of the longest final orders.
Would you be comfortable with January 15th that we'd issue it by?
I'm gonna be out looking for an applicant.
That way everybody can have time with their families.
No, I mean, under state law, we're supposed to get a 120-day waiver from the applicant in writing, so if you wouldn't mind just formalizing the extension by sending an email to staff extending it to that date.
You just-
January 15th.
I mean, we might have it produced before then, but I can just guarantee by that date we would. We might have it done before then, I'm not sure. But if you could send some over tomorrow, then that way that, okay.
Yeah, the decision will be made tonight.
Well, assuming us, assuming Western Title knows.
Yeah, I mean, I would ask the commission.
That's all.
Okay. We're gonna close the public hearing here in a moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, I mean, yeah, that's fine. My only hesitancy with that, as I think I've told you before, is that there's some disagreement on how the conditions.
We gotta bop some heads. Okay, can we,
can hit it.
are we at the point where we can close the public hearing?
The movie closed public hearing.
I'll second.
You seconded that?
Can we do that any faster? It's been moved and seconded. Did you get the mover and the seconder?
I think so.
To close the public hearing at 10:20 PM, same day. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any dare oppose? Okay. We'll come up with a motion that's going to be kind of complex. I think what needs to be in the motion is that we deny the request for the 2 adjustments, but grant a special variance, allowing the frontage to be the, whatever that 9 point whatever percent that the applicant proposed.
You getting this motion down, Kelly? You're doing a pretty good job.
Yeah, yes.
And
Put it on the screen so we can read it.
yeah, I can make up the motion, but I can't make the motion.
You
That's
can
right.
make it up.
I
Keep
can't
making it
move.
up.
And then I think about what we can add to that is the conclusions of our discussion on the points that we need to go through in the motion, we don't normally.
I mean, just for the record and to get the consent of the planning commission, I think we could tick them off now, but it's the overhangs as proposed by the applicant. The LED is proposed but shrouded.
Mm-hmm.
Did Kelly have one?
Lighting, lighting, as proposed by the applicant up to 4,125 Kelvin,
Yeah.
correct?
Is that
41.5.
what's?
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's the IES.
The IES standards?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Allowing the removal of the 6 trees, with a condition requiring city approval prior to removal of any trees that are proposed as part of the landscape plan. Let's see, did I get everything?
Allowing the windows.
Oh, and the
Running
windows,
to the
that
west side.
right.
as
Windows as defined on the
as
plan, the
proposed.
site plan.
on.
Yep.
On the
And-
site plan that we have, that we
Right.
were given, or the
Which-
pictures,
which is the
the
same.
pictures we got tonight, the activated frontage being the west.
And I think that's clear direction for staff, and those are the only real substantive changes there.
Okay. All right. Somebody say, so be it.
I
So
so
be
moved.
it. Are you okay? You're gonna so move?
Oh,
Remember
right,
what he said.
actually, there is one more. Thank you. The street trees along Highway 26, it was recommended that, let me see what Mr. Moore said here. Sorry, just take me a second. He suggested that there's a condition should be written more vaguely so the applicants can submit a proposed street tree plan for staff and ODOT to evaluate.
Yeah.
I'm fine with, staff's fine with that.
Okay.
So we just add that in there.
That's it.
Is that where you were getting at?
Yeah, I'm just looking at,
Give me a
Tracy's,
second.
Tracy's proposed things to see if there's anything in there. I think we've got everything. Okay,
I moved.
Sorry, who moved?
Don,
I'll second it.
Chris seconded. Motion is presented.
Do you want a roll call vote, or?
Yes, roll call vote.
Commissioner Carlton?
Yes.
Commissioner Lasowski?
Yes.
Commissioner McLean Wenzel?
Yes.
Commissioner Logan?
Yes.
Commissioner Mobley?
Yes.
Commissioner Mayton?
Yes.
And Chairman Crosby.
Yes, motion carries.
10:24.
That was excruciating.
Thank you all.
Stop.
Have a great day.
Why do we volunteer to do this?
All right. Items from the commission or staff.
Yeah, so we have another meeting in 2 weeks.
Yep.
Bailey Meadows. So we'll be producing a staff report next Tuesday in accordance with state law. The staff report will be abbreviated because we got the submission items so late we don't have a full analysis done yet. But we're still gonna hold the hearing, still present some stuff. The applicant, I'm assuming, will present some stuff and allow for public testimony. And then probably, have a continuation so that then we can do some more analysis and deliver a full evaluation to you at a January meeting.
Okay, well,
That's the plan.
will they be requesting the continuance, or do you want us to?
So it could work one of many ways. It could be the public request a continuance. It could be you, it could be staff, it could be the applicant. But you'll see the staff report. I think they just submitted items like last week.
I think right before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, so we just haven't had time to evaluate it fully. But we're gonna kinda give an update of where we're at in the project and the process, and then we're gonna have to do a continuance. I mean, there's not gonna be enough time to do evaluation on the materials.
Okay.
We also don't have an updated traffic analysis yet or anything to share with Mr. Replinger or ODOT, because the previous proposal, I can't get into it too much, but the
Right.
previous proposal didn't include a connection to the highway, and now it does, so we're gonna need to get some time to have agency, input as well.
Okay.
So
And
Bailey
then-
Fields, right before Christmas.
Yeah, and then in
That's
January, you'll
wonderful, eh?
probably hear the continuation of that, plus, I think the January 27th meeting is packed with like 3 or 4 things. I did remember this year that I'm gonna put it on there, that the reappointment of chairman and, vice chairman,
Vice
so I
chair.
always forget every year. So I did remember this year. And then future meetings, we have a lot of stuff coming in, a lot of stuff. So big subdivisions, 200-something unit apartment complexes, a lot of stuff. So I think we're gonna be a busy 2020.
And I think somebody said it earlier, is I know that there wasn't from the staff, you guys, any bait and switch in terms of Tracy made it sound like there was.
Yeah.
Things were changing around, so I appreciated Hollis's comment on it.
And we appreciate Hollis's comment too. That's not the intention whatsoever of staff.
Right.
Where people come to us, as you know, with questions on how can we do this differently, and we give them
You're
options.
trying to work with them.
And we're trying to work with them. It does kind of suck that it comes back to bite us sometimes. But yeah, that's not the intention.
I don't think it bit you, I think it just makes some people look.
It makes them
will-
look bad.
will look bad.
We could not have
So-
done our job tonight without
Without all
Yeah.
hours and
Well,
hours and
that,
hours.
attribute that all to Emily. And you know, one thing I want to say is that when she's giving options and presenting the staff report, some of the items we don't even honestly feel that strongly about one way or the other. And we talked to the applicant about this, or any application. We're just trying to present what we believe the intent of the code is and what the code says.
Right.
Sometimes maybe we're wrong, but that's what we're trying. There's no ill intent. We don't really get into it personally. It's just we're trying to present you with options.
Well, the other one too, when you're working with somebody is, there- a give and take. You know, if you're after everything on your side all the time, it typically doesn't work well, but, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we.
Thank Emily. She did 95% of the
you,
work
Emily.
on this
I'm
project.
going to close our meeting.
Yeah, I second it.
You hear?
Been moved and seconded to adjourn at 10:28.
Who moved and seconded?
Ron moved, Hollis seconded.
I go on vacation.
I assume you didn't have anything else. Cause we're abandoning ship.
A boys trip, my hunting trip. It's not, this is my wife.
I won't be in January.
Oh, you're going overseas, aren't you?
Well, I'm going to Turkey, exactly.
Oh, nice.
I know.
Oh, it is.
No, it's a little, it's far enough away it counts, right?
Hey, Don, make sure you take these home so you have pictures to look at after it's built.